Notre Dame fans, welcome back. It is Wednesday. It is August 17th. We're another day closer to the kickoff of the 2022 season. Ryan Roberts is our director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here back to talk some more Notre Dame football. Ryan, our primary topic today is going to be just sort of a breakdown of the offensive line and the tight ends and just sort of what expectations are for this team this season at both of those positions and how important they are to really being a foundation to this class or to this football team this year. And then we are going to go kind of dive deep into that. But at the beginning, we want to have a different conversation. So it is official. Xavier Watts, what we talked about yesterday, Xavier Watts is playing wide receiver for Notre Dame. He practiced there first Monday night. The players, had yesterday off because it was moved back into the dorm day. And today, Notre Dame was back out on the practice field this morning. Media had access, and lo and behold, Xavier Watts is rocking number 26 and moved back to wide receiver. Obviously, he had to move from number 4 because can't have 2 receivers with the number 4. And Lorenzo Styles is rocking number 4 right now. Now, I've heard different things on this. What I was first told was the move was going to be a full-time move. Then I was told he is going to be doing some cross-training. We weren't at the full practice today. We just got to see individual. So what I don't know is if he's getting his individual work with the receiving core and then kind of playing both in practice. I don't know kind of how that's working. So all I know is he's practicing with the wide receivers right now, Ryan. And for me, as long as he was good making the move, and just a little backstory, I was told that the Notre Dame coaches were a little hesitant to go to him because they kind of know what he's been through the last couple of years with the previous receivers coach, and why he moved to defense last year was partly because they had a need. And then the other main part was because he just didn't want to play for the guy that was coaching the receivers anymore, which was a common theme, which is why so many kids transferred from this roster, from this team at that position the last few years, a big reason why. And, he'd been kind of jerked around and moved. And I think that there was a hesitancy from the staff to say, how many times can we ask this kid to take one for the team? Right. So they went to him. And I think there was some, from what I understand, there was Xavier's, hey, look, I need to know that I'm going to go over there and play, which I think is an incredibly fair thing for him to ask after everything is going on. And I was told that whatever the Notre Dame staff told him, it made Xavier comfortable with, hey, I'm good with this move. So he moved over, and however they got there, to me, this move makes a lot of sense, right? I think there was not a move out there, and we talked about this over the summer. Mm-hmm. Why go get a grad transfer? Move Xavier Watts. I mean, it took maybe a little longer than we thought, but I think this is a no-brainer move, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, you created a lot of depth for you at the safety position with Brandon Joseph acquisition, with Ramon Henderson moving there, partly near the end of the season last year and playing pretty solid football in spurts. I think that you have created good depth with those 2 players on top of the fact that you still have DJ Brown, you still have Houston Griffith. And I know that Justin Walters is still on the roster, obviously, as well. So safety was kind of crowded a little bit, at least for the 2022 season. I think the biggest question mark is going to be, how do they handle it long-term? Because after this season, obviously, you're going to be out at least 2 safeties with DJ Brown and Houston Griffith out. But right now, I think for 2022, this is the best way that you can maximize Xavier Watts' talent, because I think that he would have rotated at safety this year, but now he's moving into a situation with the depth. I mean, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to play football in 2022 at wide receiver. I love that he did ask that question, Brian, to your point, because he's too good of an athlete and player not to play, right? I don't want to move a kid just to fill depth and not actually give him an opportunity to play football. I'm happy that
especially a veteran,
100%. And like you said, he's kind of taken the bullet for the sake of depth in the past already. I mean, made the move and being a very selfless player in that regard as well. So I'm excited about it. I actually went back to his huddle highlights of him playing wide receiver in high school yesterday, because I know that we had talked about, it's a possibility, all that good stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how he really makes that transition quickly, because it's not a
no, you can't drop that nugget that you broke down some film and then just slide right past that as if we're not going to talk about it. Because as soon as you said that, everyone in this chat stopped caring about whatever else is going to come out of your mouth, because they want to know what your opinion of Xavier Watts was. Or maybe that's just me projecting my thoughts and feelings onto everybody in the chat. But let's do it. You said you dove into the film. Let's talk about what you saw from Xavier Watts that makes you, because yesterday you were honest. Like, look, I didn't watch him a lot in high school, so I don't have a strong opinion. Now you're coming at me with like this kind of strong opinion of why you think this is a good move because you watched the film. So I want to know what you saw from Xavier and what you think he can add based on that to this receiving corps.
The two biggest things that you highlighted about him yesterday were the first two plays on his huddle film. First thing you said is that this guy's a yak guy, right? He can create things after catch. First play is he catches a hitch and then he makes the corner miss and he breaks a tackle and he scores like a 40-yard touchdown. The next thing that you said was that he also plays really a lot bigger than he is, right? Like he wins up the ladder. The next play is a fade route in the back of the end zone where he completely outplays a player at the catch point for a touchdown. And that stuff was just consistent all along the film. There wasn't a ton of contested catches because he was creating instant separation because he was the best athlete on the film for the most part. But you saw that after catch ability. You saw the physicality he plays with as a after catch player too. I mean, he's got some nice movement skills in tight spaces. Like he can make guys miss, but more than anything, like I loved how he finished his run after catch, man. Like he can break some tackles. He can be physical. There's a lot of nice physical traits with him. So as a yak physical guy that can also win above the rim, there's a lot to like with Xavier Watts. I would call him more smooth than explosive. I don't know if you agree with that, but like he's
more quick than he is burner.
100%. Like he gets in and out of his breaks really well. It's really fluid. It's easy, right? But I wouldn't say that he's like snap out of breaks and he's just creating this crazy separation. Like he just kind of eases out of breaks and it's very natural for him, right? So I think there's ability to create some separation. There's definitely ability after the catch, and there's ability to win above the rim. So I know we had a question in the chat. I don't know if I started, but someone said, is he a guy that can play in the slot? Is he an outside guy? I think the answer is yes. Like I think he can do both of those things, right? Because if you have the ability to win at the catch point, you can play outside the numbers. Like you can do that type of thing. It's not going to look the same as, if a Braden Lindsay is playing outside the numbers or Lorenzo Styles or whatever it is. Like it's going to look different, but he can do it. And the yak stuff gets me really excited, potentially about him having some slot reps as well.
I think that's the thing too. You talk about that ability to do different things. And that's also something I talked about is when you can add one guy to the depth chart, is he just filling depth at X? Is he just filling depth at Z? Is he just filling depth at W? The fact is you're moving one guy that can fill whatever the need may be. If your need right now is someone that can work in that Z slot rotation, ZX rotation, which is the slot field outside guy, then he can do both of those. Or you can put him at one and let Lorenzo be that other guy, right? So, you could have him be a slot if you're more comfortable with that. And then let Lorenzo then move to X if you want to get them on the field together when you need to spell Braden Lindsay, that type of thing. There's a lot of different things you can do, with Xavier Watts as well. And like you said, because he does play bigger, I think you can do some things with him as a boundary guy. He's a very strong blocker. And I think the other thing too, Ryan, is his route running I've always felt had just the potential to be better. The problem is since he has been playing safety for the last several months. A year ago today, he was playing receiver.
Yep.
He didn't move until I think sometime in October. So officially anyway. So when I look at him, he's not going to be all of a sudden a sharp route runner because he hasn't been working on it, right? But I do think there's things he can do, as you said, after the catch, in the quick game, playing down the field, blocking, that he can help you right now. And then as he gets more and more comfortable, he helps you even more. So I do think that this move was the only move to make that you could really make that would actually add someone to the depth chart that adds the ability to play for you. I think it's huge. I think it's huge. It's huge.
I think it is. I think it really can be because like you said, are there things that are going to need to be improved? If he is a long-standing receiver? Of course, he's been a guy that hasn't been practicing that craft in a little bit now. But there are a lot of physical traits for me, Brian, that I look at him and I'm like, yeah, he could do that. Like the route running thing, he could definitely be a good route runner because
Mm-hmm.
he eases out of breaks. Like it's not clunky, it's not mechanical. Like he can get in and out of breaks. I even saw a practice clip this morning from him where I'm like, yep, that's easy ability to drop his hips and get it out of breaks. Like there's easiness to him as a player. And from early on, you can compartmentalize. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. Like get him involved in the screen game early. You know, have a very small amount of routes if you just want to continue to develop him on both sides of the ball a little bit. Like I think there's ways that you can use Xavier Watts and keep it simple early on while he continues to develop the finer points of playing wide receiver. And those things, if Tommy Rees is as smart as I think he is offensively, and I do think he's a really smart coach, I'm going to look at Xavier Watts and be like, yeah, I know that you can do this, this, and this early on. I don't have to toy with those that much. Let's highlight that for you early on and get you comfortable. Because I mean, you know this for the fact. Young players or players that are making a transition, you need to see some success early. Like you're going to fail at a lot of things, right? You're going to learn and have that maturation. But there's also needs to be like a moment where you're like, okay, I can do this, right? Like I can do this well. I can do that well. I need to work on this, this, and that. But at least there's a highlighting of strengths early on. So I would love to see how they use Xavier Watts in this offense because I do think that he brings traits that just not many other receivers have. Like I think that he immediately becomes one of your better after the catch receivers. I mean, it's different, but like, yeah, I think that he can give you stuff in the screen game, in the RPO game. You can supplement that stuff easy with the Avery Davis slot touches. You can make that happen. So I'm excited. We'll see what it happens, man. But I think it's a pretty natural fit at wide receiver, if I'm being honest.
And you talked about the difference in the yak, and I think that's important to address, Ryan, because there's different types of ways to be good after the catch. Braden Lindsey can do things with the ball in his hands. We've seen it. I mean, he had a 61-yard touchdown run against Boston College in 2019 where he touched the ball behind the line of scrimmage. All that came after the catch. He had a 50-plus yard reverse for a touchdown against USC. We saw him take a screen pass and a look screen, about 24, 25 yards for a touchdown that season against New Mexico. But it was all built on the speed. It was get a crease, get an edge, and he's going to outrun you. It's not necessarily where he's a shifty type of guy. Right. Xavier Watts, to me, is the polar opposite of Braden Lindsey. And that's a good thing. Braden is fast and vertical and, speed. And Lorenzo has a little bit of that, too. And I'd say Lorenzo is kind of the in-between the two. I don't think he's quite as shifty as Xavier is with the ball in his hands, but he's shiftier than Braden Lindsey is. But he also has more speed. He's obviously a guy that can take the top off of a defense and has a little bit of the strength that Xavier Watts brings to the table. And one of the questions that we got from John A1, Ryan, that we'll bring up now because it's relevant is, he says, will Xavier Watts bring toughness to the receiver room? And honestly, that's the biggest thing for me. And I'll just come out and say it, right? I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think they had a soft receivers coach the last few years. Nice guy, good dude, soft. The receiving unit was soft. I've talked about this. He coached afraid of getting yelled at by Brian Kelly, right? You're not going to have a hard group of players. And I think that is sort of manifested a little bit into the receiving core. You've got a new receiver coach that is trying to change that. And I think to a degree, he's starting to change that. But you need someone in that room that's going to come in there and say, okay, dude, you better bring it today. And I think a guy like Xavier, he's got a chip on his shoulder because he's been doubted for a long time. He wasn't a highly ranked recruit. He did get passed over by guys he felt he outplayed at Notre Dame. And he wasn't given the opportunity he thought. There's a lot of things that have him with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, in my opinion. And he's going to bring an edge. He's also a kid who's a real physical defensive back. So he's not going to not be physical when he comes a receiver. So I do, John, think that is something that Xavier will bring to this room, which I hope elevates everybody else. Especially, I hope it really influences Lorenzo Styles, who the big thing for him that we've talked about, Ryan, is he's got to kind of just be more assertive.
Yeah.
And I think if he can kind of, maybe be pushed a little bit by Xavier about how he kind of goes about his business, then that's the thing that maybe could be the boost that gets Lorenzo to play to his full potential, where maybe that is something where Xavier impacts you that way as well. Because here's the deal about Xavier. Braden Lindsey, Lorenzo Styles, they know what he can do. They've seen him do it. They know he can play. And I've been told his teammates respected him, and his teammates didn't understand why he didn't play more in the past, is what I have been told in past years by different people. So they know he can play. All right. And so they know, hey, look, this guy's going to help us, but also push us. And I think that's a positive. And I think that's something that's going to benefit it. But you're definitely going to have another guy. And you hope that, Jaden Thomas can be that kind of guy that adds a little bit of physicality. But, he's every last few practices we've been at, he's been on the bike, riding a bike, which, and not going through drills, which is what we've talked about with him is this is part of the reason that I've been hesitant to kind of jump on the Jaden Thomas bandwagon is because this is a kid that's never been able to be healthy for a long period of time. He was banged up as a junior. He was banged up as a senior. He was banged up as a freshman at Notre Dame. And it doesn't look like it's anything major, but still it's like, he needs to show they can answer the bell. If he can, he could be pretty good. So depth at this position is still a big problem. It's still a big concern. But at the very least now with Xavier Watts, you have a guy that is older, stronger, knows the offense, and is someone who has a relationship with the players in that room. You're not bringing in some outsider that they don't know, like a grad transfer that they don't know. This is someone they've seen put in the work in the weight room, someone they've seen put in the work in the summer, someone they've seen put in the work in the spring. Yep. So there's going to be a level of respect there, someone who's hit them, who's battled them, who's tackled them. There's going to be a level of respect there that I also think is important because it's going to make that – because here's the thing that could happen, Ryan. You know where I'm going with this. You bring in some outsider, some kid they don't know, and he starts getting reps, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Who's this dude? Why is this grad transfer from somewhere else or this transfer from somewhere else? And now all of a sudden just walking in and getting our snaps, right? You bring in a guy that they know, that they've worked with, that they've sweat with, that they've bled with, that they've known. You put him in that room, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, welcome back. Let's roll. And I think that's a big part of keeping that room's minds right as you move forward.
I agree completely. And one thing I would add to John's question about the physicality, right? Usually you'll see a wide receiver maybe transition to corner or vice versa. And I mean, let's be honest, at corner sometimes you don't have to be the most physically dominant player from a, just a tenacity perspective. But I think it speaks volumes to the physicality that Xavier Watts plays with, the fact that he went from a wide receiver to a safety position, right? Like that's a little bit of a different transition. And I agree with you, Brian. I mean, the one thing that I'm looking forward to this class, because we knew like Avery Davis was a big loss because he was such a leader, right? I mean, aside from the on-field production, he was a kid that you knew was going to go to work every day. And his voice will still be there, but the actions will not be there. And you're waiting for guys, because again, Lorenzo Styles is going to be a sophomore, right? It's hard to just be like, Lorenzo, you got to be the guy and you got to lead everyone by example at 19, 20 years old. Like that's not an easy thing to do. But Xavier Watts, I think, can rub off on them and be like, man, I'm going to work, man. Like, I'm physical. Like, we're not stock blocking today. We're putting dudes in the dirt. You know what I mean? Like, that's a little bit of a different flavor that he's going to bring for a wide receiver group right now. It's like Braden Lindsey's got some swag to him, but Lorenzo Styles is kind of soft-spoken. He works hard, but he's a little soft-spoken, and you're waiting for him to really take that next step. We know Deion Colsey's a little bit soft-spoken. Tobias, I've never
and they're young.
Much from Tobias.
Right, they're young.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And Tobias is a true freshman that wasn't in for the spring. So, like, he's not going to be that voice in a room. So you need that physicality. You need that leadership. You need that demeanor to show how to work. Not that these guys don't work, but there's just a tenacity level to the way that Xavier Watts works. So I agree with you. I think that could be huge for this room right now. That needs depth, but also I think needs a little bit of an edge to it.
We did have a super chat from Randy Hernandez that asked this question. And Randy, thank you very, very much for that, buddy. We appreciate you. Does he play slot mostly? So here's the interesting thing, Ryan. And earlier we talked about what he could do. Let's talk for a second about what he should do. Because here's the danger. If you immediately thrust him into different positions, then you say, okay, is he going to be able to really get comfortable in any of them? So do you just say, hey, look, let's move him around and figure out a rotation for him, and then just say, hey, look, we got to get you caught up. We'll meet with the extra after practice. I need you to meet with Lorenzo and Braden and the guys in the film room and Joe and those kind of guys in the film room. Does one of your GAs kind of take him under his wing? Does Avery Davis take him under his wing once he comes back after his surgery, those type of things? I mean, there's got to be a plan for how to get him rolling. So either say, hey, we're going to move him around, and then just it's up to him to get caught up, and we'll keep throwing him out there and giving him opportunities, but he's gonna have to figure it out. Or do you say for the first week, maybe two, we're going to say he's going to play here? So like my first thought was to Randy's question is to put him in the slot, with the thought being, okay, we know Lorenzo can play both. So you have Braden, who's an X, Lorenzo, Xavier, who'd be the Z. Mm-hmm. And then Lorenzo can do both depending on who you want in there. Plus, Jaden Thomas can do other things. Joe Wilkins can play some X, if he's healthy. Although I just, based on the practice video I saw, I still have a hard time seeing him being fully ready to go for Ohio State, but hopefully he can continue to heal up and get back out there. So I think that's the question, Randy. We don't know the answer to that yet. I don't even know if Notre Dame has necessarily decided that yet, but I think that's the decision that has to be made, Ryan, is how do you want to get him caught up to speed? Let him master one position, then to move him around, or just throw him right into the deep end and say, hey, look, we got to get you ready for September 3rd. We can't wait 2 weeks for you to get comfortable. We need to start pushing you to get these things done now.
And again, there is multiple ways to go about it, but I actually am of the mindset that I think early on, giving him a lot of slot reps is the best way to go about it, because what are you supplementing right now, Brian? I mean, the fact is that Avery Davis was going to be a full-time slot receiver for the most part, right? So you supplement those snaps early on by giving a guy touches and getting him comfortable in that spot. And then as it kind of comes back to him and he takes the next step and he's getting developed, then I like kind of cross-training at multiple spots if you see him as that type of player, which I do think he can be. But I am definitely of the belief that let's get those slot reps figured out early on, right? Because that's going to be a staple of this offense, I believe. I think that that's going to be a position that is used even more than it has been in the past. So I would like a little supplementation of that. I don't know if supplementation's a word, but it is now.
Yes.
And I would like them to just kind of figure out what are those reps going to look like in a position that we thought, as long as Avery Davis was back, you didn't have to worry about that, right? Like he's going to be the almost the full-time slot. You're just like, there might be some times where Lorenzo Styles is working the slot, or like a Michael Mayer, or like different body types. But for the most part, you're like, you kind of could just pencil it in like Avery Davis healthy, he's our slot receiver. You need to figure that number out. And I also think that's the best way for a transition sometimes, is getting a player confident in one spot before putting too much on his plate. Some people can just, like, you could throw everything on them and they're just going to be like, sink or swim. I'm good, man. Like I can get up and I can learn all this real quick. But I kind of am more of a favor of like, let's give him a lot of slot reps early and then we can expand as he becomes more comfortable.
So that's kind of where we're at with Xavier Watts. Obviously, we've talked about what we think could happen. Now it's time for him to go out there and prove it. And it's not just about him. That's the thing, Ryan. The last thing is it can't just be about Xavier. Xavier's going to put in the work. There's no doubt about that. It's really imperative that Tommy Rees and Chancey Stuckey figure out a plan to say, hey, how do we get – because if I'm in Xavier's shoes, I'm going over there and I've decided to go in. And so just so people understand is one of the comments that we had was from D. Trollhunter that is related to this. He said, I know the staff didn't want to ask him to come back to offense in the spring, but in hindsight, you probably should have. My understanding is they did. They did ask him in the spring, but it was up to him. And he wanted to stay on defense because he felt like Chris O'Leary took him seriously. Chris O'Leary coached him up. There was a level of trust there. He had gotten on the field and had success, where he didn't have that on offense with his previous position coach. And he doesn't know Chancey Stuckey. So am I going to take a chance with this guy that I don't know at a position where there's some good players that I never got a chance to play? Or am I going to stay on defense where I know the coach believes in me? I know the coach is going to coach me up. I know the coach has already made me better and is going to put me on the field. And I think that's really what it went into it. And the Notre Dame staff was going to allow him to make it. It was allowed to be his decision, and it should have been, just like it was his decision this time. If Xavier would have said, Coach, I appreciate what you're saying, but no, I don't want to go over there, they weren't going to force him to go over there.
Yeah.
And so that was his decision. So, but the reality, Ryan, as you kind of look at this, is they have got to kind of do their part as well.
Sure.
Because Tommy Rees has to know that Xavier is buying in, but there's going to be in the back of his mind sort of, oh, here we go again, right? And he's got to make sure in the first few practices that they do things to make sure that doesn't creep into Xavier's mind, because it's only natural if he's going to do that. If he goes out into practice and he doesn't get any team reps because, oh, well, you're just not ready yet. You know what? Throw him out there and let him make mistakes. That's how he's going to learn.
100%.
And then make sure he's getting his mental reps when he's not on the field, but throw him out there and let him get those reps. I'm not saying they aren't doing that or are doing that. We haven't seen it. I'm saying this is what they need to do, to where you don't allow that doubt to creep in. As we said the other day, Ryan, what I would have done is the first day he's at practice, I'm designing like 4 or 5 plays to get him the ball right now. I don't care if they're hitches, jet sweeps, screens, take a shot. I do not care. I'm going to make sure that he's going to get the football. And just to let him know, like, hey, man, you're taking one for the team. We're going to have your back.
Right.
I think that's imperative. If he feels that way, then I think that's where you're going to see Xavier Watts really take off.
You know where I kind of like him too, Brian, a little bit to your point there is we know that you can manufacture some stuff in the run game for Braden Lindsey, but I kind of like some run stuff for Xavier
Yeah.
Watts too. Like I wouldn't mind an end around or a jet sweep or something where I'm just getting him in space a little bit and just letting him go. Cause again, he's not going to outrace you to the corner, but like string it out and then hit it up inside and hit north and south.
Yeah,
With that
plant
physicality he
vertically.
has. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'd be all for that, honestly.
For me, it would be what based on what, because you know this, Ryan, you're going to run reverses and jets and stuff like that based on where you're trying to go.
Sure.
So if it's a deal where you're like USC 2019, they knew they could get USC to bite and hopefully outrun them to the sideline. And so when that's your goal, it's Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles, and that is it. It's because you need to outrun them. If it's more of like a jet sweep where you're not sure how that rover is going to come up and play it, and you may have to bounce it or cut vertically or do whatever, and it's more of a run where you're not anticipating to get to the edge, then it's Xavier Watts because he's the more shifty guy, in my opinion, and he's stronger.
Yes.
Obviously, I don't know if I would necessarily do that on September 3rd unless he's proven it quite a bit in practice, but those are the things I would get him to do. And that's why I really like him more on the quick screens, because when you get him the ball on the look screens and the bubbles, you're somewhat negating the fact that he isn't a burner like the other guys. He's already out there. Now it's the shiftiness and the strength takes over. I think that's the thing. So I think that's where I see him kind of fitting in and kind of making that transition. And hopefully they are able to help him get comfortable very, very early.
Agree.
We've got a super chat from Lawrence Adams relative to this, and then we're going to move on to our other topic for this. I have a sophomore athlete whose coach just asked to move positions. Her coach made it comfortable. I have faith in the staff to make it good for X and the team. And that's the thing, Lawrence, is if the coach does what needs to be done to hey, not only convince him to come, but then once he comes, back up the things you said to him in the conversation to get him to move. That's where trust starts to be built, because that's going to be the biggest stumbling block for Notre Dame and Xavier Watts this year, Ryan, besides any injuries that may happen to guys, is if he doesn't have trust in this offensive staff, which was the issue before.
Right.
And they're going to have to work to earn that. And he's going to have to work to earn their trust as well, but it's got to be a two-way street. And in the past, it wasn't always a two-way street. It was a one-way street. Xavier was doing the work, but the other side wasn't. And I think that's where that one went.
I really do like that the staff came to him personally and just like talked to him about it, though. Like there'd be some coaches that are just like, you're making the switch and that's just what the team needs. And we're not going to give you the option. If you don't like it, too bad, type of thing. And I kind of respect that the staff came to him and said, like, we understand that what you've been through. We understand you've made the switch before. We understand kind of everything that you've been through. But I think this could help the team and it could help you get playing time and it could help you be an asset to the team. So I really did like kind of how the staff went about making this transition.
So we're going to take John Wayne Winchester's advice because it's time to talk about some big uglies. And we're not going to talk just about the big uglies. We're going to talk about the tight ends as well, Ryan, because we've talked a lot about, quarterback, there's talent, but, right? A receiver, there's talent, but, running back, there's talent, but a lot of things that need to be proven. And we've talked a lot about the offensive line and tight end this offseason, and it's kind of like it's assumed that these are going to be strong suits of this football team. And there's still a lot of questions and things that have to get answered, but there's an understandable confidence this unit is going to be pretty good. So what we're going to do today, we've talked a lot about the different groups, is we're going to talk about sort of what the expectations are. What are the expectations for them in the opener? What are the expectations for them as the season goes on? What are going to be the keys to this unit sort of taking that next step and saying and proving that what we have talked about is where they need to be. And so that's going to be the focus of today's show as we talk about the offensive line and the tight ends. And let's just kind of go tight end first, Ryan, because I think obviously Michael Mayer, we've spent a lot of time talking about Michael Mayer. We don't really need to spend a lot of time on him other than the simple fact of obviously with this football team, the expectation is that Michael Mayer is what you think he should be. He's one of the best tight ends in college football. That's what he needs to be. And improve in some of the areas that he didn't improve on. And there's two things for me right now that when I evaluate Michael Mayer's film this year that I'm going to be looking for. One, is he more consistent catching the football? And it was never a lack of good hands. It was more of it was when he would drop balls, it's when he was wide open. I mean, you go back to the Clemson game as a freshman, you look at the Florida State game last year, he's wide open. It's just you got to make sure you secure the catch first. It's, football 101, something you teach at Pop Warner level, right? Like, make sure you secure the catch first before you go. He's got to clean that stuff up, and then he's got to continue improving as a blocker. Those are the two areas that I'm going to be looking for to say, okay, he's really put in the work to take his game to another level.
Run blocking is the biggest thing for me. Like, I think that he has the tools where he could be, and this from an NFL draft perspective for a second, but he could be the best blocker in the 2023 class and one of the best blockers in all of college football. I think that's very possible for Michael Mayer because, I mean, he's 265 pounds, incredibly strong, has the physicality, has decent length to him. Like, everything is there for him to be a dominant player in the run game. I think he's been good in spurts, very good in spurts. I think there's been moments where you're like, yup, he can do that at a very high level, but I don't think it's been overly consistent in the past. It can be, though, which I'm excited about because, I mean, everything that we're falling in love with Michael Mayer is the tenacity he plays with after the catch, the ability he has to get up and pluck the football, his ability as a route runner for a bigger guy. All the tools in the passing game are just silly. And if he's able to have just more consistent hands as far as just more concentration throughout the catch point and do all that type of stuff, then he's a dominant receiver. And we've seen that already at a large portion of his career. The biggest thing, though, is are you a two-way threat as a tight end, as a blocker as well? Because I think he can easily separate himself because there's going to be people that are like, best tight end in college football. Is it Michael Mayer? Is it Brock Bowers? And it's like, cool. Depending on what you want, you can make a case for both. But if Michael Mayer is what he was as a pass receiver just last year and maybe a little bit better, plus also being a more consistent player in the run game, then it's not even a conversation in my point because Brock Bowers isn't blocking anybody. Michael Mayer can be the best two-way tight end in college football because he has the tools to be a dominant player in the run game.
After that, it's okay, who steps up next? I think that's really where the big question mark is here, is he can't just be the only guy because of the lack of depth at receiver and to a degree running back, although we expect that to kind of be better kind of moving forward. So, I think that for me, Ryan, when we talk about that group of what's next, it's okay, who steps up? Is it Kevin Bauman as a blocker? Is it the freshman guys stepping up as pass catchers? Holden Stace, I've heard, has had a great camp. Eli Raridan, we know, is a guy. Just came wrong. Finally get cleared. Is he that guy? I think that's really the big question mark is, so when you talk about expectations for the tight end group, there's a lot of assumptions that, well, they're going to be fine at tight end because they have a lot of talented guys. That's fine. But the reality is there's still a lot of if you think they're unproven at receiver and running back, there is no more unproven group on the roster than the tight ends behind Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I think, what is there, 2 career catches? I think Kevin Bauman has 2 career catches. That's it. So you have the injury to Mitchell Evans plus the transfer of George Takis has left this depth chart in a really rough spot from an experience standpoint, but there's talent. And that's going to be the thing that I wonder is, can that group be ready to step up and provide a presence? And I think the first thing that they need to establish is who of that group can come in day one on September 3rd and go block somebody. I think that's going to have to be priority. I mean, we'll talk about in the past and we'll talk about in the future the need for that second tight end's got to get some targets, and there's a lot of cool things you can do in the pass game with Holden Stace and Eli Raridan and Cam Barong. At the end of the day, for this team to really have the run game it's capable of, there's going to need to be a 12 personnel package that just goes out and says, we're going to run it down your throat and there's nothing you can do about it. And if the tight ends aren't blocking at a high level, then it's a little harder to do that. And so it's going to be important for somebody in that group, at least somebody in that group, to really step up and emerge as a legitimate edge blocker for this offense.
Yeah, I mean, the role is really important. I honestly hope throughout like the entirety of the season that you get a few guys that are able to kind of step up and have different roles potentially, right? I mean, like I think in an ideal world, I mean, whether it is Kevin Bauman or it is a Kane Barong, whoever ends up being the second tight end as far as from the blocking perspective, I would like also there be times where like, hey, let's put the second tight end in that's now actually a Holden Stays or an Eli Raridan that can maybe do more stuff in the passing game, or if it's Kane Barong. And I like, if Notre Dame's able to departmentalize their skills as the second tight end, I think that long-term is a really interesting thing to see because, I mean, it's something where I think there's a couple players on the team that can do a little bit of everything from that position, but it's really exciting because they're just such different players. I mean, you have Kane Barong, who's like 6'3", 240 something pounds, kind of like a physically put together, but a little bit of a shorter guy compared to everybody else. Kevin Bauman's the more traditional, like 6'5", 245, 250 type of guy. Eli Raridan's the skyscraper. Holden Stace has kind of that physical profile of a little bit of a taller version of a Kane Morong, like kind of physically put together. So there's different body types, there's different styles. And I think if Notre Dame's able to get a little out of everybody from it, well, not everybody, but at least a couple of them for different roles, I think that could be really advantageous for them, because the good thing about Michael Mayer is, we already talked about it, he can do a little bit of everything, right? Like he has the potential to be a dominant blocker. He already has been a dominant receiver on the level. And I think that's where you can mix and match different skill sets behind him, because it's not like he's a one-trick pony of a pass catcher or a one-trick pony of a blocker. He can do everything. So you can really departmentalize what the guy behind him looks like at times.
For September 3rd, agree with you wholeheartedly. My only, and I don't even think it's a pushback, because I think you're going to agree with this. Having guys doing different roles is something that we've talked about. I like it. But here's the thing. They can't be all one-trick ponies. And that's the concern. Against Ohio State, it doesn't matter, because there's no tendencies with those guys. Right. You don't know what they're going to do with those guys in the game beyond just what your normal 12 personnel tendencies are.
Sure.
As the season goes on, like if Kevin Bauman's your blocker, and again, he's got to improve a lot to be that guy, because he was not a good blocker last year for Notre Dame in the limited snaps he got. Now, I think part of that was the injuries. Like he was kind of coming back from injuries. I think he's going to end up being better there. So that's why I think that's how I feel about Kevin Bauman. I kind of, maybe it's wrong, but I kind of dismiss the fact that he wasn't a good blocker last year, as he was banged up a lot, coming off some things. I think he's going to be better, but we'll see. He's got to go prove it.
Sure.
But if we get into the season and that's all he's doing, eventually you get into that 12 personnel, and we've discussed this. Okay, that guy's not a threat to run the football. If you're throwing Holden Stace out there, and I'm just going from one extreme to another right now, you throw Holden Stace out there and all he is a slot pass catcher. When he's in the game, you kind of know, okay, here's what they're doing. And so that's going to be the key, more so for BYU, Clemson, and USC. For Ohio State, it's just at least one guy's got to step up and be a blocker. If they can do some other things, that one-trick pony that could be a problem once tendencies are established can actually benefit you in the opener, because the Ohio State doesn't know what that tendency is yet. So maybe you go 12 personnel. And, I mean, Eli Raridan's 6'6", 245. He doesn't look like a skinny, only throw it to him guy. You go 12 personnel, line him up in an attached position, and maybe do something where all of a sudden he's running, streaking down the field or something like that. I mean, so those things could work early, but eventually they don't all have to be complete players, but they have to at least be competent at the other thing that's not their strength. And that's going to be the thing that's going to be interesting as the season goes on, Ryan.
Sure. No, I agree with you. I think that if a player, so like, I would say for me, it's like if you are a pure one-trick pony, then it's much more easy to predict what the outcome is of a play, right? Like if let's say a Michael Mayer and Eli Raridan combination on the field, and from the snaps you've seen up until that point, Eli Raridan's been a big play threat as a receiver, but hasn't been asked to do much as a blocker. This is just a hypothetical one here. Then it's easier to predict, like, hey, he's in the game. It's probably some sort of movement-based pass play where, like, you're going to try to get him working in space, seam run, whatever.
You may even go nickel as a defense. You may say, hey, look, let's put a third safety on the field, right?
Yep.
Because of that tendency. Right.
100%. Yeah. And that makes it a lot easier for a defensive coordinator to game plan against that. If a player is just a strict one-trick pony, I am coming from the perspective of, you at least need to be solid in the other aspects. It's like when we talked about the quarterback position, right? It's like, oh man, that guy's great outside of structure. Well, but if he's not good inside structure, then it doesn't really matter, right? Sure. Like there's kind of a baseline that you need to be at. So that's where I'm hoping the tight ends are equally solid in every aspect, but maybe one guy excels in one very role, one guy excels at this particular thing. And that's where kind of, I think the departmentalized nature can happen when your guys are capable of playing. Like I'm not going to throw a guy out there that can't block a lick. I'm not going to throw a guy out there that has no ability in the passing game. You have to be serviceable at least as a baseline. Right. But as you are serviceable and you have a couple players that are serviceable players to have those snaps, then it's capitalizing on what their skill sets are for me.
Because here's what you do. If I'm a defensive coordinator and you're going a lot of 12 personnel and you put, let's just use Kevin Bauman as an example just to prove a point.
Sure.
You put Kevin Bauman in the game and I know he's not running a pass route. And if he is, he's just a decoy. What I'm doing is I'm basically I'm teaching my safeties that you are going to key on that on 84. You're going to come down in the box. I'm immediately going 8 in the box easily. I may just do double quarters, and the safety to his side is going to read him a certain way. But basically, I'm fitting that downhill. I mean, I'm not worried about defending him. I'm going to say, hey, I dare you to throw to him because you've shown you don't want to do that.
Sure.
And so it makes it a little bit tougher to run the ball. And I know that, like, in 2012, they were able to get away with that. You know, with Troy Nicholas, I think caught like 5 balls all year. But like Troy Nicholas would run some routes and showed a little bit of a proclivity, but also you can't win like that nowadays. Well, I mean, look, I'm sorry, you can't. I mean, it's been a decade and the game has changed. You can't win. You're not going to go beat a ranked team 13-6. Now you're just not. I mean, not a good one, right? And so when you look at that 2012 season, that's just kind of you just can't repeat that, right? Like, we're all looking for that, repeat that secret sauce. But Notre Dame in 3 of their first 4 games scored 20, 20, and 13 points. If they scored 20, 20, and 13 points in 3 of their first 4 games this year, there's a good chance they're 2-2. I mean, that's just because, Ohio State and North Carolina can both beat you if you're only scoring 20 points a game. Well, Ohio State will beat you. North Carolina could beat you as well if you're only scoring 20 points a game. And so, here's what they did in other games. 20 points in a 2013 win over against Stanford. You're not beating the number 7 team in the country with 20 points this year. 17 points in a win over BYU. You're not beating BYU this year with 17 points. I just don't see it happening. 29, 20, and 20. That 29 against Pitt was with a couple overtimes to get to that 29. 21 against BC, 22 against USC. You're not beating USC this year with 22 points. I don't see it happening. So the point is, the game's changed. You can't get away with that. We know you're running, and because it was grinding the clock out. We're going to run the clock out. Our quarterback's going to get in space, do a little bit of things. We're just because you can't score on us. The game has changed, and so you can't get away with that, in my opinion, at this point in time.
So we had real quick, Brian. We had Jonathan Gabrick say, so Notre Dame beats Ohio State 13-6, game 1 confirmed. He's obviously just having a little bit of fun.
I'll take it.
All I'll say is you better sign Al Gold to a lifetime contract if he holds that.
Oh, there's no question.
6 points. Like, that's crazy.
I'm a big fan of, you got to show me. But if you hold Ohio State to 6 points, if you hold Ohio State to 13 points and you beat them 14-13, I know it may be jumping the gun, but it's pay raise time for Al Golden. It's only been 100%. One game. I don't care. He earned a pay raise on that one game alone.
Yep.
Because you got all these people say this is one of the best offenses ever. It's best Ohio State's best in the country, blah, 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 blah. We'll see. I mean, it's going to be really, really good. There's no doubt about it. So, yes, if you hold them to 6 points, yeah, Marcus Freeman deserves an immediate raise. Al Golden deserves an immediate raise. I mean, the whole defensive staff deserves a pay raise immediately. And you just take away from the offensive coaches and give it to them, because if they only score 13 points against Ohio State, then they don't deserve the money that they would be getting for that week. So
that's very true.
Except for Harry Heastan, I'm not taking money from him because I'm not messing with Harry Heastan. So I'm taking it from everybody else. So, Ryan, that's tight ends. It's a group that needs to be strong. And look, there's things that I think they can do to help out with the pass game too. And I would say that if you're going to have a guy that's a one-trick pony, I'd be more prone to allowing him to be sort of a slot pass game guy, because if like Holden Stace is only going to play the slot, then I think you can have it. Let's say he's not ready right now, and I don't know if this is true. We've seen one full practice and it was with no pads on. I'm just making a point. Freshman, 225 pounds. Mm-hmm. Let's say Holden Stace is a really good weapon in the pass game already. You're like, boy, this kid can help us in the pass game. Then I think there are some things Notre Dame has and can do with their personnel to have him sort of be a slot or an outside guy where he doesn't, look, he can't attach blocked, or he can't block attached. That's just not what he's going to do. We're not going to put him in that situation. So maybe you put him in a wing and you kind of move him around and do some slide stuff and some, maybe he can get in the guy's way on the backside of an inside zone, away, or maybe duo away or something like that, outside zone away, whatever the case may be. But if you can still run the ball, though, because you can do some of your outside stuff. You can do your read zone stuff where you leave that edge player unblocked, and then you get Tyler Buckner out there, and you've got basically Holden Stace sort of serving as a lead blocker on a nickel or a corner or a rover out there. Well, that's more of a better matchup for him in the run game. So if there is going to be sort of a one-trick pony, or a guy that maybe is way better in one area than the other, I do think you can get that in the pass game more than you can get in the run game. It just means that, some of your run – and what I would say is you just treat it like 11 personnel at that point in time.
Sure.
And your play calling is similar to what you would get out of 11 personnel. That's kind of how I would look at it, because you're going to have Michael Mayer. You're going to go double slots essentially, which they've done with 12 personnel in the past. They did it last year with George Takis and Michael Mayer, where they both line up in the slot or both line up outside, and have your two receivers. So I mean, there's personnel groupings where you could have Holden Stace out as basically your X, and have either Braden Lindsey or Lorenzo Styles as your slot, and have Michael Mayer as basically your W, and then your other receiver, whether it's one of those two guys or Xavier Watts or whoever, sort of a slot there. You're in your 11 personnel, actually you're in your 10 personnel alignment out of 12 personnel.
Yeah.
And you can now run the ball, because now what you can do is you can do some real interesting stuff with your RPO game. So like, how are you going to defend this? Are you going to treat this as you would in 10 personnel and vacate the box? That's cool, because we've got some inside zone stuff we can do with the read concepts, because you have a mobile quarterback now. You can run some RPOs where it's the reverse. Most RPOs are run pass option, but there are some that are sort of pass run options where, you're like we've talked about before, you run like quick little fades on the outside, then you run just outs or slants with the inside guy. If they vacate the box, the quarterback sees it, he drops, that guy buzzes, bam, he turns it into a draw play. There's all types of things like that you can kind of go to where you can run out of that kind of 10 personnel look. And it's not 10 personnel, it's 12 personnel, but it's just there's nobody attached. You're in doubles on both sides of the line of scrimmage, or you can go 3-by-1. But then if they want to stay tight because they're afraid of Buckner, and let's say, who I'd have at running back in that scenario, you're going to have one of two guys. It's either Estime or Tyree. If I think the team is going to sort of, kind of condense, I'm putting Estime in there. If I think they're going to spread out, I'm putting Tyree in there. I'm just letting him crease one of those. But if they're going to try to, play that double area, I'm putting Estime in there, and I'm just going to hammer them. And then when they start to creep in, now you're pulling and you're throwing that bubble screen to Braden Lindsey or Lorenzo Styles or Xavier Watts or whoever, and you've now got Holden Stace, a 225-pound kid, blocking on a corner. So I think there's a lot of things they can do. It just depends on how interesting they want to get with it. But I do think the pass game is where the previous statement about you can't have a one-trick pony, it somewhat gets negated a little bit in the pass game because of the unique ability of Kane Barong, Eli Raritan, and Holden Stace.
Right.
Because the speed and athleticism they all three bring to the table. I do think there are some interesting things that you can do with those guys that could make it like, okay, all right, put Eli Raritan to the boundary at 6'6", 245, and have Michael Mayer beat to the field. I mean, there's all types of different stuff you could do.
There's some things, Brian, I'm thinking more near the red zone where there might be a time where I have a 3 tight ends in, but I'm still in 11 personnel, because it's like you throw a guy like Eli Raritan into the boundary and you put Michael Mayer out as the slot, and then you just have somebody in line as the blocking tight end or just the inline tight end in general. I mean, there is so much that you can do, and that's the beauty of being Notre Dame with how they recruit tight ends and produce tight ends traditionally, is the fact that you have guys with multiple skill sets. I mean, in spurts, and I know we saw it, like when they had Tyler Eifert, like they would just put him out wide and just be like, yeah, I mean, in that situation, he's not technically a tight end, but like, does it matter? It doesn't matter at that point because he could literally do those types of things, right? So, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of things that you can do with these types of receivers, and I'm excited to see it because I think that there is a lot of departmentalized options that you could have behind Michael Mayer. I don't know if it's going to be one guy taking the majority of the second reps at tight ends. I hope, again, to my original point, I hope it's a couple different guys because I think there's lots of things that you can do with this tight end room. Like I would be not disappointed, but I would be, well, I could say disappointed. I would be disappointed if for part of the season, if Eli Raritan is not a red zone weapon. Like I would be very disappointed if he did not at least have that type of role in this offense. So there's a lot of possibilities, and I look forward to seeing how the tight ends behind Michael Mayer develop.
I will end the tight end conversation with this, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
I will be shocked if Eli Raritan and Holden Stace don't play this year.
Same.
And I don't mean play 4 games and then redshirt. I mean play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if there are some deficiencies in the blocking stuff, as the number 2 blocker, it hurts. But you can do enough in the 11 personnel and 10 personnel looks with 12 personnel on the field that you can still give your receivers some time off. You can still do some different things. You can still get some advantages on the perimeter run game. And then when you get in a short yardage of goal line, right, all you got to simply do is just put Tosh Baker out there, or put Michael Carmody out there, or put Andrew Kristofic out there, put somebody out there they did that last year when they didn't have really a number 2 blocker. I think that's something also that you can do as well.
Yep. It's going to be fun, man. It's going to be fun. I naturally love the tight end position in general, but like I'm really, again, just so many different body types and so many different styles. I think that this is going to be a situation where, there might be times where Michael Mayer is playing more of a wide receiver role, but you still have a couple other tight ends that I think can really do a lot of different things in the passing game. So yeah, I'm excited to see just how the tight end position is developed. Because the other question for me is long-term also, who's the next guy after Michael Mayer? Who's the guy? Because
that's a good point.
You need to see who emerges.
Yeah.
We don't know. Could it be a Kane Barang as the next guy? Sure. Could it be Eli Raridan? Sure. Could it be Holden Stays? Could it be Bauman taking a big step forward? Like, who knows? It's a lot of possibilities as the next in line at tight end U.
Because they're going to be jockeying for that position this offseason. There's no doubt about it. They're definitely going to be a lot of jockeying for that this season. So I'm curious to see how that's going to go. So, Ryan, let's move on to the offensive line. I think this is the group that, even though there's a lot of question marks technically on what's got to be proven, this is the group that I think people have the most confidence in, understandably so.
Mm-hmm.
Primary reason being they're very talented at tackle, and I think they have the best offensive line coach in football coming back. Okay. And we've heard a lot from the defensive linemen about how, we got to bring it every day because these guys are bringing it every day. And so at the end of the day, this group has to be what we think it's going to be. And I think there's 2 levels of expectations for me when I talk about the offensive line. It's what they need to be in the opener and what they need to become by the end of the season. Mm-hmm. And that may be the same thing. It just depends on how quickly they can get going. But the reality is that if Notre Dame is going to have a shot to win in the opener, they have got to come out and establish the line of scrimmage and not just do a good job. And, at the end of the day, I graded them out higher than the Ohio State defensive line. They won that battle a little bit. Can't be that. They have to come out and decisively win that battle. Give the quarterback time, open up holes, control the clock. Because you know what? Here, I'm going to give you all some really wicked, deep, thorough football analysis. Ohio State can't score when their offense is on the sideline if you're doing your job. Right? Mm-hmm. That's the reality of it, right? And that's that caveat if they're doing their job. So, that's the thing is like limit the possessions. Now, I'm not saying you're playing keep away, but I'm saying you're building around what you do best. And that is we're going to run it down your throat. And if we can create big plays, we'll create big plays because that's another thing that this team can do. But we're not going to try to match you athlete for athlete, score for score, tempo for tempo. We're going to make your offense sit and get a little bit cold because we just put a 12-play drive together a couple times in the game and give our defense time to adjust. And, it's like when I think of this, I think of I'm a Broncos fan. Mm-hmm. And I think of that NFL Films deal where they're talking about the last Super Bowl John Elway played in, Super Bowl 33. Have you ever seen those NFL Films things where it's like Mike Shanahan and it was like a 10-6 game. It's Mike Shanahan and Garrett Kubiak spending the whole time while the defense is on the field, and the Falcons went down and were driving down the field. Chris Chandler was leading them down the field, and they're having all these things, and they're looking at the film, and they're like, hey, we think we can do this, and they spend this whole time for one play. And then they sit down with John Elway, and they're explaining. I'm thinking, how long is that freaking drive by the Falcons? You know what I mean? But they ended up missing a field goal, and then they instituted that play, and essentially Eugene Robinson, who had intercepted John Elway the previous year in the Super Bowl for the Packers, was getting real aggressive coming down because, you got to stop Terrell Davis. So they ran a bootleg to the right, but instead of kind of throwing out that way, they got Eugene Robinson to come down, and they ran a corner post with Rod Smith, and Elway launched it over top and touchdown. Like, they spent the whole time in between doing that, and I kind of got this vision of, like, Notre Dame going on a 10-play drive that takes, like, 5 minutes off the clock, 5-6 minutes off the clock, and Al Golden is sitting there all this time with the defensive staff saying, okay, what can we do to design a pressure to get to C.J. Stroud and, maybe give us a stop, right? So there's something to that. And so, but that can't happen, Ryan, if this group isn't dominant. And that's asking a lot of a line that was just simply not good last year. That's got some guys moving around. There's some other question marks and things that, we got to see what happens here over the next couple weeks from who's your personnel that you're going to have out there. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I don't care who you throw out there. You got 8 guys that have started games at Notre Dame before. You got to be able to go out there against Ohio State, a defense that was not good last year, and say, sorry, you guys are really good. You're going to get better. Have faith in Jim Knowles, but it ain't today.
Right. Brian, you have such a positive outlook, man, because you said it was not good last year. I would say it was bad for most of the year, if we're being honest.
It was pretty terrible.
Like, it was pretty bad last year, offensive line-wise, which is, I mean, what a compliment to Coach Easton that he walks into the room that was not good last year, and people just are assuming that it's not going to be an issue at all, like it. And I mean, he deserves that credit, right, at this point. Like, for what he's done at Notre Dame and just the course of his career at developing offensive linemen, he deserves all the leeway to assume that unit's going to be a lot better. And I think it will be, because there never was an absence of talent under Coach Quinn. Like, they have a lot of talent. You have 2 offensive tackles this year, although we're only sophomores, that are studs, man. Like, they have the potential to being very good football players. You have a guy like Jared Patterson, who is going to be a 4-year starter and a guy that could be a potential first to second round pick. Like, he has that type of upside in him. You got a guy like Josh Lugg that's played a lot of football. There's guys here that have played very well in spurts. And now the fact that you have Coach Easton, I think it's just everyone just assumes this team's going to play with more tenacity. They're going to play more physically, and the talent's going to take over. So it's one of those things where I think people have the least amount of worry about this offensive line, despite the fact that it wasn't very good last year, which is pretty funny to think about. But again, I think Coach Easton deserves that credit as of now.
Well, and we've seen it before, right? I mean, we saw it from 2011 to 2012. Notre Dame had a 29-yard jump from 2011 to 2012. And it was even more than that when you talk about before the postseason game against Alabama, where they were just outmatched. I think they rushed for, I'm going to look it up here real quick. It was, 32 yards. But you look at that season, and early on, they rushed for 293 against Navy, weren't so great the next 3 weeks. And then 376 against Miami, 150 against Stanford. And at that time, 150 against Stanford was a lot. 270 against BYU, 215 against Oklahoma, 231 against Pitt, 184 against BC, 221 against Wake, 222 against USC. And that was with a football team that had lost Michael Floyd from the year before. It was a football team that had lost their starting right guard, Trevor Robinson. They had lost their starting right tackle in Taylor Dever. Braxton Cave had suffered an injury the season before. He was playing, but he wasn't 100%. You had Mike Golick in the junior in the starting lineup. You had Christian Lombard in the starting lineup. As I mentioned before, you lost Michael Floyd, and yet you still went out and jumped 29 yards. You had more yards per play that next year without Michael Floyd in your offense, without Jonas Gray, who was really good for them in 2011. I mean, Jonas Gray in 2011 was a really dynamic player. Yeah. And you go out that next year and you see that big jump at running back. George Atkinson has a nice big jump. Sierra Wood goes from 5.1 yards per carry to 6.5 yards per carry in 2012 against a pretty tough schedule from a defensive standpoint. They played some really good defenses in 2012. So we've seen it before, and he's got, with all due respect to Zach Martin and Chris Watt, who are excellent players, he's got way more God-given ability top to bottom with this group than he even did with that group. 100%. And so I think that's where you have the reasons for optimism. I think you also have an offense that can be more creative than maybe what you had then. You've got more speed than you had then. You've got more overall skill than you had then. And obviously, Michael Mayer is not Tyler Eifert. They're different players, but he's really good. Right. And so I think that's the reason that there isn't a lot of optimism. And the one thing you had in 2012 as well was a mobile quarterback that could make you right. You didn't always have to necessarily blow a team up off the line when you had a quarterback like that. We saw that in 2017. So I think those are things that factor into it as well. I mean, the years that Notre Dame's had really good offenses, I mean, if we're being honest, the years where they had, I think their most explosive offenses are years they had mobile quarterbacks. And one of those years they had a guy that couldn't throw in Brandon Wimbush. He just really struggled throwing the ball that year. Yeah. And, you look at what they were in 2015 with Malik and Deshaun. You look at what they were in 2012 with Ev. You look at what they were in 2017 with Brandon Wimbush. because you don't always have to be perfect up front. And I think that's the key. But they've got to be physical. They've got to establish that in game one. And I think that's the expectation for me is they're going to make mistakes. They're going to miss blocks. They're not going to be perfect in the first game. But what you can demand and what you can expect and say, if this doesn't get met, it's a disappointment in game one, is they need to fight. They need to battle. They need to play hard and really take it to Ohio State physically. If they do that, then I think they are going to have a shot to be in that game and maybe win it at the end. It's really going to come down to, in that particular game, big picture with other games, it's different players. But in that game more than any other, the offensive line can't afford to have a, well, we need time to get going mentality. And from what I'm told, they're not being given that. Don't worry, we'll give you time. It's no. We've got a big game on September 3rd. You got to get ready. Let's get after it. So that's what we need to see. I mean, they can't win the opener if the offensive line doesn't do that right. Again, they don't have to be perfect, but they have to battle.
Like a wise coach once said, Brian, everyone's going to make mistakes. Make them fast ones. That's what I take from. But
fast and physical.
When I say a wise coach, that was actually me that once said that. But that is something that I think that Notre Dame has to be instilled with, because to your points, I mean, it's fun to think about if Zach Martin was dropped on this team right now. And Zach Martin is a future Hall of Famer, former first-round pick, 16th overall pick by the Dallas Cowboys, been several times an All-Pro. He is a fantastic football player. But if he was on this team right now from a physical talent perspective, from just a God-given perspective, I mean, what would he be, third on this offensive line? Probably somewhere in that ballpark. Like, I mean, I think it speaks volumes to the amount of talent that is on this roster. If there's one thing that we give Jeff Quinn credit for, he brought some talent to this roster. It's still a talented roster from an offensive line perspective. So adding that God-given talent with the mentality that Coach Heastan brings to the game, I think that's why you have such a deep belief that this offensive line is going to be very good at its peak during this season, because although it was not great last season, I mean, you can't supplement the fact that you have a 6'6", 330-pound offensive tackle, a right tackle that looks like he could be a future first-round pick. You can't supplement the fact that you have a guy like a Joe Walt, who's a former high school tight end that is 6'7" plus 317 pounds. Like, you can't supplement that stuff.
Athletic.
You can't teach that.
Right.
Exactly. So all that to say is that I do also have the deep belief, and I'm buying into it, because Coach Heastan has earned every benefit of the doubt for making this transition. And I'm excited. This is the position that I'm most excited about this year, to be honest, because I think it's going to be the biggest jump from last year to this year, is how much better the offensive line is going to be. And that is because of Coach Heastan. He's the biggest reason, if we're being honest, and the talent, of course.
Right. Now, much of the focus is on the O-line's got to get better because you've got to run the ball. But the reality is the O-line getting better takes pressure off every aspect of your offense. And that's what often gets missed in this, is if your offensive line is physical running the ball, then obviously it's going to put you in more ISOs outside. It's going to allow you to get more one-on-ones where the speed can go make plays. Mm-hmm. But it goes beyond that. I mean, it also, one of the concerns at times when Coach Heastan was here, if you're going to say, what was the criticism? If you have to, no one's perfect. Sure. So what would be the criticism that I would ever had of Coach Heastan? It would be they weren't always dominant at both things. Mm-hmm. In 2017, at times, they weren't great in pass protection. They weren't. At times in 2015, they weren't great at running the ball the way they needed to. But they were pretty good in pass pro that year. 2012, pretty good at running, but just overall just couldn't handle the more athletic teams in the pass game, right? And Everett had to rescue them a lot that year. 2013, elite pass pro team, not really great at running the ball. And there's a lot of different reasons why. For me, it was a play calling thing more in 2013 than it was not being good at it. This group is going to have to be good at both, Ryan. And that's going to be a big key for me, is they've got to be good at both. Yeah. And so the reason I'm optimistic is because in some of those years where we're talking about they weren't great at both, part of it was personnel driven. Sure. Or in play calling driven. 2013 was a very finesse offense. It was designed to not be great at running the ball. And 2017 was built as a power offense. You weren't going to necessarily be practicing 75, pass play, be prepared to, 75 pass plays type of thing, because you weren't going to do that. So there's reasons why, but striking that balance, I think, adds to the challenge for Coach Easthand in this line. Can you establish the physicality, but then also be good in pass pro? Because it can, especially at tackle, guard is always physical if you're doing it right. To me, even in pass pro, guard is always physical. Even when you're handling twists and stunts, it's always stepping and meeting them with force. Tackle, especially, to me, it can be really, this is what makes tackle hard, is because on one play, I got to be willing to come off the ball and punch you right in the mouth. And on the next play, I'm receding.
Yes.
I'm giving ground. Patience. And if your mindset is and this is what hurt Mike McGlinchey in 2017, is sometimes Mike would kind of be out over his toes because he's so aggressive. Then he's got to get out of his stance, and he could do it against Temple and teams like that. But when you're trying to do that against Lorenzo Carter, it's a little harder to do, and actually win on the edge, or to get out to a wide rusher against some of the better teams, or the ends that Miami had that year. Mm-hmm. And so can you strike that balance? That's what I want to see, because they're going to need to look. Somebody said in the chat, you're going to beat Ohio State by running the football. No, you're not. You're not going to beat Ohio State by running the ball. You're going to beat Ohio State by being balanced. Now, you may run for a bunch of yards, but if you're only running and you can't throw, you're not going to beat Ohio State. You got to do both. You got to establish the run and then build around that, but you got to do both. And if you're getting in situations where you can run, Ohio State will be able to schematically stop you from running the ball if you can't throw. We saw that against Georgia in 2017. We saw that against Miami in 2017. We saw that with LSU in 2017, which is why the offense stalled for much of the game. And when did the offense finally wake up? In the fourth quarter, when they finally started throwing the football a little bit, right? So I think that's the reality. You got to be balanced. You have to be balanced, which means you have to protect the quarterback when you're in passing downs, but also when you're in first down, and you've got to throw the ball in first down. So that's going to be the other part of the challenge, is can this group be good at both out of the gate? Because you don't have a couple warm-up games this year. You've got Ohio State out of the gate. And that's another part that adds a little bit to this opening game matchup, and puts even more expectation, and I'd say pressure, on the Notre Dame offensive line.
I think that they have the physical makeup to be good at both. Because, I mean, you wrote an article about just how big this line is, right? So just immediately from the run game perspective, I'm like, who's the lightest guy on the offense? 308, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the biggest guy on the smallest guy on the offensive line. So every one of your starting offensive linemen rate from 308 to Blake Fisher was most recently 326, 327,
327. Yeah. So it's 316. 310, 308, 317, 327.
So it's a massive line. And as long as that line is playing with tenacity, I think the run game should obviously be a big improvement. The pass game stuff, Ryan, I mean, you mentioned like 2012 at times would struggle in pass pro against like the longer, more explosive, defensive linemen they're playing. That's because you had a bunch of guard types that were playing tackle. I mean, Zach Martin was a left tackle, and he's obviously made the transition to tackle. To guard in the NFL.
Christian Lombard was also always better when he got to play guard as well. They moved him back to tackle in 2014 because the other guy they tried to move to tackle wasn't getting the job done. 100%. To your point.
Right. Yeah, but with this group, you have a 6'6" Blake Fisher that is a tackle. Like, he can play tackle. We've seen it already. Joe Wald is 6'7" plus, easy mover. He's a tackle. Josh Lugg is playing guard now, who has literally been a tackle for you and has done a solid job in spurts. Like, I think we both agree that he's going to be better inside just because of the lack of length and all that good stuff, right? But he is a guy that's played tackle. So you have three guys that have literally played offensive tackle. And by the way, Jared Patterson was also a left tackle when he was a true freshman, and he's playing guard now too. So he should be a pretty good pass protector just from a functionality of having length, having athleticism, and having enough strength. And now you move Zeke Correll, who struggled at guard, into center, where his lack of length and size overall, even though he's a little heavier now, is going to be able to mask, if we can use that term, better at center. So you literally have a bunch of offensive tackle types, which gives me hope that like this is going to be a good pass blocking team. And honestly, in the Oklahoma State game, for the most part, it was pretty well blocked from a pass blocking perspective, especially at offensive tackle. Like, it was a lot of good moments. So I think you have the physical tools and the philosophy to be good at both areas. But to your point, You got to see it, because last time we saw this offensive line, it was not great. But now with Coach Heasan's philosophy behind the God-given tools that they have every ability to be very good in both areas. They do.
You're talking about an Oklahoma State team because that was the one time we've seen Blake Fisher. This is the reason it's important to point out. There's two reasons it's important for Ryan to point that out is because, number one, it was the best pass rushing team in the country last year.
Yep.
And it was the guy that is leading the Ohio State defense all season. Mm-hmm. And you also had the one game we saw Blake Fisher and Joe Alt together. I mean, it was that was the game we saw them together. And they gave up 2 sacks for 10 games, and they called over 70 pass plays. Like, that's the thing, is they called over 70 pass plays and only gave up 2 sacks. And if I remember correctly, Ryan, I believe they were both third down sacks. If I remember correctly. I know the one where Blake got beat, I'm pretty sure that one was third down. And I believe the one that Joe Alt got beat for a sack was third down too. It was and they were late sacks. They were nobody's open, Jack's still back there, nobody's coming free. And in that situation, Jack, hold on to the ball longer because you need to find somebody open because it's third down. I don't care about you taking a sack on third down. You know, I don't want you to throw it away or because you can't. You're going to punt anyway. So
that Joe Alt sack, like, honestly, if I was like doing a stat sheet for the offense, I'd be like, that's a coverage sack. Like, I'm not putting that one on Joe Alt. You know what I mean? Like, that thing was just nobody was open. Plays over. Like, that's just that's like the one you see in 7-on-7 where it's just like, oh, couldn't find anybody. It's a sack, right? Like that's kind of what I see in that play. I don't really remember the Blake Fisher one as much, but the Joe Alt
was
one,
similar. It was similar. The guy beat him wide, and then he was eventually able to kind of bend back in and get to Jack late in the play. It was a very similar play to what happened with Joe. And again, you're called over 70 pass plays against a team that had 54 sacks coming into that game and had 6 sacks in back-to-back games against Baylor and Oklahoma. And then before that had 5 sacks in a win over Texas Tech, had 7 sacks in a win over TCU, had 8 sacks in a win against Kansas. So that's what they did coming into that game. 8, 7, 5, 6, and 6.
That Baylor offensive line is really good too. Yeah. So that's a big indicator.
And Oklahoma's always had a really good offensive line. Mm-hmm. So, you look at it, Ryan, and you say, that's kind of where you need to be. Oklahoma last year gave up 33 sacks. That's a decent amount. But, again, 6 of them came in one game against Oklahoma State. Yep. So we've seen that potential to be there, and I think I think your point about them being more natural tackles from a length standpoint is a big part of that.
Yes.
Then it's up the middle. I think that's really a big question for me. Is I think Zeke Correll, beyond the tackles being to their ability, Zeke Correll I think is really the big question mark for me. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the chat about who may or may not be injured. We're not going to comment on that until we know for sure what's going on. Sounds like there might be something to it, whether it's an illness or an injury. There's all types of things floating around. We're not going to dive into the rumor game. But one thing we've talked about before is injuries happen. And you're in a position with the Notre Dame offensive line where you have the depth to have guys step in that have played football before, right? But for me, taking all that aside, center is going to be so important this year. You've moved Zeke Correll there. He struggled at guard last year. I thought he played well in his 2 games at center. And his 2 games at center were on the road against the top 25 North Carolina team and in the national semifinal against Alabama. And I thought he played well. He had some snaps where he got beat, but I thought he played well overall. I think he's always looked better at center for whatever reason, which is funny because he was a guard in high school. And he's going to get coached now. He's got some more weight on. If Zeke can be what we have been told he has been in the spring and summer and fall camp, that's important because if he's not, if you aren't good up the middle, Ryan, you're going to have a really hard time having a top offense because it blows up everything. If you are getting beat up the middle, it's almost impossible to have, with any sort of consistency, it's almost impossible to have a good offense.
We talked a lot about the philosophy and the physicality that Coach Heasan is preaching, Brian, right? At offensive tackle, you can play a little more finesse game, right? Because it's about getting to the spot and remaining patient and doing all those types of things, backside cutoff on inside zone, like all that type of stuff, which could be a more dictated on you're establishing leverage, but not establishing leverage with physicality, establishing leverage with foot quickness and length and doing all that type of stuff. that is not the game inside. Those guys need to play with extreme physicality. Two things that I think you got that were big bonuses from the offensive line last year. It's kind of a blessing in disguise type of thing. One, you found out who your bookends are in tackles, right? Like that was the one thing with the injuries is like you found out that Joe Alt can play. So like that's great. So now you have two guys. And the other thing is something that you mentioned. You did create depth last year. And it wasn't ideally how you want to get to create the depth, but baptism by fire, man. A lot of guys played football last year. I mean, you're looking at guys like Michael Carmody, who might not even play this year, guaranteed, and he started multiple games for Notre Dame last year. Like you have guys that have played football. So you created depth, you have a better offensive line coach, you have talent. Everything is there for this to be a really good unit, but I agree. It's only going to be as good because I think most people have an assumption like the offensive tackles are at least going to be good, right? Well, will they be dominant? We think they can be, but they're at least going to be good. The inside is the question mark because you have a guy in Jared Patterson who is moving a position. He's playing a brand new spot. He's never played before. We have to see what it looks like. You have a guy like a Josh Luck who we have seen at guard a little bit, but the last time we saw him, he was playing offensive tackle. So he's also changing positions. And Zeke Correll, who was coming off of let's be honest, if he was a soft-minded individual, last year could have killed his confidence.
Yes.
And actually, like, he could have just checked out and been like, I can't come back from that.
And that's happened to a lot of guys.
100%.
A lot of guys.
And credit to Zeke Correll, because a lot of guys could not have come back from what happened to him last year, change positions again, and say, like, I need to play next year. Like, I need to play. Like, I'm too good to keep off the field. That's what he's done so far from spring into the fall at this point. We'll see if he's able to lock everything down, but we assume that that's how everything is trending right now, barring any setbacks. Right. So you're looking at three guys that are new to their positions for the most part. Well, at least returning to their positions, their original positions when you see Correll and you're Josh Lugg. And you have a guy that's playing a brand new position. So there are question marks inside. There's no doubt. And I think that they will be the big example in this offensive line this year of how good of a teacher Coach Hiestand it truly is. Because if they're able to play well, that's like another stamp to Coach Hiestand's resume. Like, man, he's just every single time he's got an opportunity, he just flourishes and gets guys to play to their utmost ability. So you need them to at least be a good group that plays with a lot of physicality. I don't necessarily think they need to be a great group because I think you could still have a great group if your offensive tackles are dudes. But if they are just an average group,
you're talking about inside. Inside.
Yes, inside. Like I think if you're both your tackles are really good players and your inside is just good, like a good baseline but plays physically, you can still have a great offensive line. You can't have the leakage though inside, and you can't be an average to below average group. Like they have to be a good group, in my opinion, for them to be close to their potential.
Because I'm trying to think of the different groups that Notre Dame has had. And, you know, it's interesting. Like they've always had like in a lot of those different units, they've had one spot that wasn't as good. And in most years it was an interior guy. I think that's the one thing that was different about the 2017 team is the 2017 was dominant up the middle. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is they were dominant up the middle. Where they struggled at times is on the perimeter. You know, that's what happened against Georgia. So happened against Miami. And so, you know, Joe and Lou Samoji has told me that Joe Moore's philosophy when he was in Notre Dame was always figure out tackle first and then you'll go from there. I don't think that's necessarily changed. You know, I've kind of gone back and forth on that, you know, but I think that's still the foundation. But as you said, you don't have to be Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars at guard. I mean, that was one of the best guard tandems I've seen in a long time, not just at Notre Dame, anywhere. I mean, in 2017, Alex Bars and Quentin Nelson were really good. And that's no disrespect to Sam Mustipher, who was a pretty good player in 2017 as well. I'm just talking about the guards. That was a brilliant guard tandem. And a lot of the highlights that year were right behind Quentin Nelson. But there's a lot of highlights that year where Alex Bars was the lead blocker. So if you can be dominant up the middle, it certainly helps. But you don't need to be that way. As long as you're battling an assignment correct, that's the key. You can't like a tackle can make a mistake and kind of overcome it because of the depth and the distance. It's harder to do that up the middle. And so they're going to have to be consistent. And that's going to be the question mark. So, you know, for the rest of the part, we don't address rumors. We don't speak about injuries until we have confirmation from the coaching staff. That should be journalism 101, in my opinion, especially with the way that Notre Dame runs things now. So we're not going to address that. When we get confirmation on something, we'll address it then. And you guys know how we operate. So To me, Ryan, this group has to. If there is an injury, don't care. Next man in. That's the expectation. That's what it has to be. And we saw that a little bit in 2018. When Alex Bars went down, the offensive line battled back and kept, did some nice things. They weren't nearly as good as they were the year before, obviously. But they still had leadership. They were still able to do some different things that year. So they're going to have to continue to be that way. There's no excuses. Well, we weren't as good because so-and-so got hurt. Don't care, right? This is big boy football. Everybody has injuries. Step up and go get it done. That's the big key.
And again, the blessing in disguise is that last year you were able to create depth for yourself, right? Like, I think that you have guys like Andrew Kristofic potentially, like a Michael Carmody potentially. You have a couple guys that can step in and I think can play football for you, can play at a good level, in my opinion. Like, I don't think we've seen the best of either one of those guys. And if they have been attacking the offseason like I think they probably have, then God forbid an injury happen, but you should be able to, with the amount of talent that Notre Dame has in the building, to be able to stay afloat, right? Like, It can't be if one person gets injured, this can't be like, oh, we're done. If one of the tackles gets hurt, Tosh Baker has to come in and play good football.
Right.
If somebody inside gets hurt,
Andrew
one of those
Kristofic,
guys,
right.
Kristofic and
Rocco, whoever,
Carmody, whoever, they have to come in and they have to play good football. It's got to be a thing. Like, that's why this unit has been so successful, is that it's not just, a 5 and that's done, right? Like, we've heard multiple times from just recruits this year. It's like Coach Heastan is coaching up everybody, right? And there's more talent just beyond the starting 5. That's why there's been literally an interior kind of position battle, this spring and into this fall season. Like, Andrew Kristofic played a bunch of football games and he might end up not starting this year. So you create depth for yourself. It has to be able to stay afloat if there's an injury. You can't use that as an excuse at this point.
Mono Lair made a good point. Said, Brian, I'm a bit behind, but your comments about taking money from the offensive coaches if they score 13, including Harry Heastan, are you implying that you're willing to mess with Dylan McCullough? Because that dude is intense. It's a good point.
I wouldn't mess with him. Yeah.
It's a good point. Yeah.
And
he's a running back. He's an old school running back, from Eastern Ohio. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to mess with Dylan. It's a good point.
He looks like he gets still strapped 500 pounds on his back and squat. So, I wouldn't mess with that guy.
Point. Yeah, Jared Parker, he seems like a nice guy. I don't know, Chancey Stuckey, little guy, Tom Reese is a quarterback. It's all good. Yeah, Coach Heastan and Coach McCullough. I don't think I'm messing with those guys.
Which side of the ball gets to claim Brian Mason? Because I don't think I would mess with him either. He's got a lot of energy to him, man. He's scrappy.
No, I think he's hyper. I would just kind of give him some sugar and then he'd crash, after a while. So I think I'd be okay there. Definitely tougher than the last special teams coach. That's for darn sure. So anyway,
the shade.
Anyway, so that's going to kind of do it for this part of the breakdown today. Obviously, offensive line is going to be the key. It's going to be the key. This offense cannot, if this team makes a playoff run, the offensive line is going to have to be really good and relatively consistently really good. So that's kind of where they are. Don't go anywhere yet because we are going to go to the mailbag here afterwards. But before we transition to the mailbag, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. We launched this morning our first edition. John Garcia Jr. and I recorded it last night. It was the first official podcast in the CFB Nation podcast. You can see it on YouTube, but we also have it on our CFB Nation, which you can subscribe to. We have the link in the on Twitter. I sent this morning. There's a link to subscribe to the Apple Podcast. Is also on Spotify. We're going to continue to get it on more and more platforms. But we had our first official one. John broke down the SI 99, went in depth on how they do rankings at SI 99 and what's behind it and how they're different from other outlets. We broke down his number one player. Talked about Arch Manning, talked about the strengths of the 2019 class or the 2023 class. Some sleeper players. There's a couple guys that SI 99 has in the top 99 that other people don't even have in the top 200, and kind of talked about those players. So it was a lot of fun. First edition. Also recorded a sample show yesterday that we're going to probably turn into a show with the other hosts that we're finishing up. They did a sample show. We've got some contracts assigned, some graphics to make, but we have another team that we're going to announce that I'm super excited about. That's going to be more of a college football show, so you're definitely going to check that out as well. So that is CFB Nation. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. So Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag. We have some good questions today. So let's get to those here right now. Connor Patton says, if Michael Mayer reaches his ceiling, how would that affect your expectations?
Expectations as far as how good the offense will be?
I just think in general, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for him and the offense.
Well, Connor, I mean, I think if anything, if Michael Mayer is near his ceiling, because I still think there's a decent amount that he can still do, that just makes everybody around you so much better. And that takes some pressure off some guys, right? Like we just spent a lot of time yesterday talking about how the wide receivers don't have depth, but they have talents, and we need a couple of these guys to step up. You still need the guys to step up, but it's less if you have a guy like a Michael Mayer. Like it's a guy where if he takes his game to the next level, you need just good serviceable players outside. You need guys that I don't think quite have to be to that level, and it's going to also help your offensive line tremendously in the running game. So I think that he's the type of player with his all-around impact. If he gets close to his ceiling, you still need guys to step up, but it does take a little bit of the pressure off of them to be there, to take a massive jump, because he's that quality of football player, in my opinion, that can do a little bit of everything and can do it at a very high level at his peak.
That's some more Michael Mayer questions, Ryan. We'll just kind of work out a lot of those here right now. John A1 says, does Michael Mayer have the potential to be the best blocking tight end in the country?
Yes. I mean, he has the size, the physicality.
Big and strong, right?
Yeah. Like he has all the tools to do it. I mean, there are some guys though in college football. Like I think of like the Darnell Washington from Georgia. Like that's literally his role in the offense, right? Like that's what he just does all the time. So there's some guys that just have more attention on just being the blocker as far as in their role. So I think it's a little tough, John, if we're being honest, but I think that, I mean, you could sell me that he takes that giant leap and he is the best in the country because he certainly has all the tools. It's just, he also has other things that he focuses on outside of just being a blocker, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Good. I'm glad.
Notre Dame 2164 says, is it weird that I'm not worried about tight end or offensive line hardly at all this year? No.
I mean, I talked about it, right? It is kind of funny when you think about where the offensive line was last year, and it's just the big, implications of having Harry Hiestand back is like, I'm not worried about it at all. So that one's the funny one, but like Notre Dame 2164, the tight end position. When have you ever worried about tight ends at Notre Dame? Like it's just no matter who's the coach has been, like it's just always been a strength for them.
The only time it hasn't been a strength was self-induced. Mm-hmm. There was a stretch from 2014 until like 2017 that they just didn't use the tight ends. They had good ones. You had Ben Koyak in 2014, and they caught 30 passes. Drafted. Then there wasn't like anybody else after that. They caught like a pass or two, right? They only had like 30 catches. And then 2016, it was the worst. I think Notre Dame's tight ends caught I actually think that was the year, if I remember correctly, that they were a little under 20 total catches, which again, is it a shocker that the worst year they've ever had was the year they just stopped throwing to the tight end? Yeah. Durham Smythe had 9. Nick Wisher had 3. They had 12 catches to the tight ends. Like just another example of how poorly coached that football team was, Durham Smythe's an NFL football player. Still, he was a 4th-round draft pick,
He's a pretty solid NFL player,
right.
too.
Like Nick Wisher wasn't a bum, right? I mean, so the fact that they even try to use the tight ends was just patently absurd. Then next year saw a jump. Durham Smythe caught 15, Alizé caught 19, Nick Wisher caught 9, Cole Kmet caught 2. So you started to see when Chip Long showed up, you saw it go back up. But there was a stretch where the tight ends weren't productive, right? But it was self-induced. It was just the way that they ran the offense, which I thought was strange. A little bit in 2015, it was due to injuries. I mean, Durham Smythe got hurt early. You remember he had 3 catches in the first, I think it was first 2 games. And then he got hurt, and then Alizé was a freshman. So, they didn't use it a ton in 13, but that was more because they didn't really have. And Nick Wisher was banged up that year. They had 1 tight end healthy all year, and he was a true freshman. But they'd still go to him in big moments. If you remember the Temple game, they banged a corner route to Alizé on that last drive. Like Will Fuller capped the drive off with the game-winning touchdown, but they banged Alizé on a corner route for a big play that set up that touchdown to Will Fuller. So they'd go to him, but it's just a rookie. You can't build it around it. So I think that was really the thing. But the talent's always been there. It's just it has always been used correctly.
even in those couple of years where maybe it wasn't as productive as it has been, though, you also didn't have a Michael Mayer on that team, right? So like you even have a different caliber of player. So like, yes, to the question, I have no concerns over the tight end position.
Yeah, and same with offensive line. I mean, I think the only question I have with the offensive line is how good is it going to be?
That's fair.
Like it may not be elite, right? We need to see that, right? It may just be good, but it's going to be at least good. In my opinion,
good is still a lot better than it was last year. So I'll take
way
it.
better.
I'll take it.
Now, that's not good enough for them to
sure.
take the next step as a program, but it's certainly better than it was last year. There's no doubt. Because you can't get away with it being as bad as it was last year. Like, you can't play. So, like, let's say Ohio State and Cincinnati kind of wash each other, right? Top team against top team. Okay, they take each other out. Playoff team. After that, with all due respect, especially if we're just looking at defenses, as much as I liked Wisconsin's defense last year, it's not the Clemson defense. It's not, right? I mean, and it's that front seven especially is better than anything that they've faced this year. BYU is going to present a lot more problems than a lot of the teams they played last year in the front seven. So there's some teams on the schedule that you're like, I don't know if this is a year you necessarily want to have a year like they couldn't survive and go 11-1 against this year's schedule if the offensive line was as bad as it was last year.
100%.
In my opinion, because of the up in schedule. So it's got to definitely be significantly better. Just the question is how much better. I think that's really, at this point in time, the major wait and see for me. I have a super chat from Alan Watson. The last couple of years of Quentin Nelson's time in Notre Dame, whenever we needed a yard or two, it was follow me. Who is that guy on this team? Who do you think that will be?
Blake Fisher.
I think it was never Quentin. It was always it's here. Two things. This is a bit of a misnomer. Number one, and number two, he always had Mike McGlinchey beside him, right? So you're never running one behind one guy. It's always kind of usually a duo. But what's interesting, Ryan, do you know they actually ran behind in the goal line? They actually ran behind Alex Bars and the right side, Kramer and Hainsey, who rotated tackle more than they scored more rushing touchdowns in the red zone to the right side. Now, right side includes inside zone to the left. Because the way that inside zone is blocked, the way that Notre Dame runs it, is it's designed to cut back. Chip Long was so determined on that. He says, if you take it front side and you don't score, I'm pulling you. It's designed to come back. Yep. And so if you want to run behind Quentin Nelson on inside zone, you'd actually call it to the right, and it would cut back behind it. They actually would run inside zone to the left more that year in certain situations than they did to the right, meaning they were trying to run behind Alex Bars. And if you remember that play against USC that I've talked a lot about, it was an inside zone read to the left. And then they ran with Brandon, and then Alex took the defensive tackle who was in the B gap and used his right arm and threw him into the A gap, and Josh Adams cut behind him for an 80-yard touchdown. So it's really it's a side more so than a guy. Even in 2017, that was true. But it also depends on how's the defense playing you. Why did they run to the right side as much as they did in 2017? Two reasons. One, they had faith in Alex Bars and the guys that tackle. And number two, because teams usually overload the side where Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey were. Yeah. So there were just situations in those 3rd and 1s goal lines where it's like, well, Quentin's good, but he can't block 3 usually, usually.
Don't tell Quentin Nelson.
I was watching the LSU game from 2017 the other day, and Quentin, it was the play. Remember when they threw the touchdown pass to Michael Young to make it 14-12, and then they ran a shovel pass for the 2-point conversion. Quentin Nelson was pulling around, and he met a linebacker at the line of scrimmage, and like you couldn't really see the hit because of the angle of the camera. But the next thing you know, you see those two squirting out of the back, and then Quentin's taking that guy like 7 yards deep into the end zone. It's just like, that's got to be soul crushing for a linebacker.
Doesn't sound like fun. Doesn't sound like fun.
No, I'd fake a hamstring injury right before that game. Like, coach, I was ready to go, but man, my hammy tightened up. I don't think I can play against Quentin Nelson today.
So disappointed. Oh,
yeah, man, I really wanted this action. I wanted this smoke. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Liar. You ain't got to lie, Craig. You ain't got to lie. All right. Archer452 asks, what is the second ugliest uniform, including helmet, in college football? We all know Michigan is number 1. Okay, so if we work with that premise, and we'll just grant him that, although I don't necessarily agree. I hate Michigan, but I don't think they have ugly uniforms.
Michigan's
But
uniforms are okay.
we'll just grant they're not ugly, they're not great, they're just whatever. It is what it is. I like Delaware's better.
This is an easy one. This is an easy one for me.
I'm curious
It's the Maryland flag uniforms. They're so ugly, man. They're hideous.
Maryland has one uniform combination that is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
When they go with the black helmets, and the red shirts and the black the pants, those are awesome. Mm-hmm. When they do the with the helmet that it looks like somebody vomited the Maryland flag on half of their helmet, those are hideous.
Horrible.
Absolutely hideous.
Absolutely horrible.
Yes.
They look terrible. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad we agree on that one.
No, there's no question.
Man.
No question. I hate the Maryland uniforms. Oregon will have some weeks their uniforms look awesome, and some weeks their uniforms look like trash. They're so inconsistent with it.
Still better than the Maryland flag, though. Still better than the Maryland flag.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other ones where I'm like, oh, that's hideous. Like the Maryland flag one's just bad.
Yeah, that's bad. A clear number 2 to me. I'm gonna kind of go through. This sort of the just and see if there's anybody that kind of pops out at me. Like you said, I don't. There are some alternate uniforms that I hate. There are some teams that will play that'll go with alternate uniforms that I really don't like. But some teams that I like, I used to really dislike pitch uniforms. I don't know why. I just dislike their uniforms. But ever since they've gone back to the traditional light blue and the yellow, I actually like those. And I think I didn't like it because they went away from what they normally did. Big 12, everybody's kind of got traditional uniforms.
Whose uniforms I'm not really a big fan of Texas Tech's. Not really a big fan.
Which ones?
Like any of them, really. I can't think
like them. I like the TTU. It's fine. It's black and red. I mean, they're pretty simple. You just do not like. So what we are hearing now is that Ryan just doesn't like black and red uniforms. That's what we're hearing right now.
No. I hate the Maryland flag type of thing.
Yes.
I don't know the black. I don't know. The Texas Tech uniforms are just like too. I don't. It looks like it's. You remember like NFL Blitz? Like I feel like it would be in like one of those games. Like it just doesn't have any creativity to me. It's just boring.
I got you. I don't love them, but I don't dislike them. You know whose uniforms I think you're talking about boring? Who has the ugliest, most overrated uniform and helmet combination in all of football? It's Penn State.
Yeah.
I mean it's
ordinary.
It's traditional. Yeah, it's traditionally ugly. I mean, I'm sorry. It's like, it's always been ugly. You just were really good. I do not like Penn State's uniforms, and I do not like their helmets, especially their helmets. I think are very. I mean, at least Alabama's boring uniforms have a color. They're not white with a blue stripe down the middle. Those are ugly.
You know who's ugly? It's not like a big name brand, but I think Temple's uniforms are kind of ugly too. If I'm being honest,
well, they always change them so much. They've had some. I don't
like that cherry red either. Yeah. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me.
Well, I don't like when teams that are maroon go to that. Like when we talked about with the Phillies, I hated when the Phillies went to like red. Like, that's not your uniform color. You were maroon. Go back to maroon.
Well, the Phillies have been wearing like the throwback blues a lot lately, and those are so sweet, man. They're fantastic. Yeah,
there's not a lot of uniforms that I hate. There's alternate uniforms that I have not liked, but traditional, like Ole Miss, I like Ole Miss's traditional uniforms.
The Ole Miss, like baby blue ones, those are nice.
I really like those. And I'm pretty much anytime I don't know what it is, but I've always liked, maybe it's because the school I grew up going to, we had basically that baby blue was our colors, baby blue and yellow. Mm-hmm. But like I've always liked UCLA's uniforms for that reason. It's like and it pops. Like UCLA's blue pops. Like it's a light blue, but it really pops. I really like that, and that's why I always like Pitt's old school uniforms. Plus, like anybody else, you always kind of like what you grew up on, right? And then when teams go away from that, it's like, what are you doing? Why are you going away from that? But Purdue's had some ugly uniforms over the years, but they have gone back to something that's workable. Like I was watching a game from 1982. And they have like these really ugly, like gold helmets and like white jerseys and gold pants that just looked hideous. They just looked absolutely hideous.
Here's one reverse. Who, aside from Notre Dame, you can't pick Notre Dame. What's your favorite uniform in college football?
I've been asked this before, and my answer always changes because it just kind of depends on what mood I'm in. I think UCLA is probably in that conversation for me. I don't know why, but I've always liked Texas's uniforms.
Texas is fine.
Yeah,
Like that burnt
I just think
orange.
the
All right.
burnt orange. You've got the
Yeah.
horn on the helmet. Like
Okay.
I don't know
Yeah.
why I like Texas's uniforms, but and one of my favorite uniforms is when Oregon goes with their traditional all green with the yellow O on the helmet. Like that's one of my favorite. Like I hate it. You know who used to have ugly uniforms? Oregon before Phil Knight started making their uniforms more. Remember that really ugly green and yellow combination they had? That was gross.
The Joey Harrington version of it, right?
Like early in his career. And then I think his last year is when they switched, I believe. But they were ugly. Achilles Smith is what I think of when I think of those ugly uniforms.
Yes.
They were really ugly when he played.
Uh-huh.
But that's a good one. I mean, there's several that I like. I'd have to North Carolina.
I was going to say North Carolina is my number one. I love the Carolina blue.
Yeah,
man. Like it's just so sweet. Yeah.
I like UCLA because I think the gold adds a little bit more to it. I just do. Whereas like the Carolina blue with the white, it just looks lighter. I think the gold adds a little bit of a sharper contrast with UCLA when you're comparing two really sharp uniforms. There aren't any that I hate. I don't like Florida State's new version of their uniforms. I liked their uniforms back in the 90s. I thought they had sharp uniforms back in the 90s. They look weird now. Like I don't like the new helmet. Like the jerseys don't necessarily match the helmet. It's just kind of weird. You know who? Memphis will have alternate uniforms that I think are just hideous. They'll do like the Bengal stripe. You talked about this last. I hate those. I hate those. Just give me the M and call it a day.
The all blues, like the light blue they use.
I hate those.
So sweet, man.
Hate those.
So sweet.
Hate those.
So nice.
Absolutely hate those. Tulane has ugly uniforms. That's another team that's got ugly uniforms.
The only Memphis one that I really do not like is when they do like the all grays. Like I'm like, nah.
Yeah,
I'm good on the all.
You know whose uniforms I also really like? I like SMU's uniforms when they go with the traditional, like with the white helmet and either blue or red jerseys. But I've always thought those were. I like simple, but with colors that pop. I don't like crazy helmets. Like give me a nice, Mustang on your helmet, a Longhorn, something like that. Just something a little bit more than a freaking navy blue stripe right down the middle on a plain
I'm not
white
I'm not much of a purple guy, but I kind of always liked Washington's a little bit. Like I think they're kind of sharp looking.
I like their purple,
the chrome, and
I like their purple, but their pants get messed up sometimes. I don't like when they go to the gold pants.
I like the Jake Locker era of Washington
gold,
stuff, like
purple, white, right?
Yes,
that looked sharp. Yeah,
yes.
I didn't like the Steve Entman version of it, right? When it was gold, purple, gold, and I don't like purple and purple. I didn't like it when they did that as well. When Notre Dame played them in the 90s, they had purple and purple. I didn't like that either. I like gold, purple, white. I think those are sharp. I don't like Washington State's uniforms very much. So it's not a big fan of that.
They just can't do anything with those uniforms, man. Like they look different than like the Alex Brink era of Washington State, but they're still not good looking.
No, they're not. They're not. That's an interesting conversation. I don't like Wake Forest uniforms either, by the way. I'm not a big fan of theirs either. Now that I think about it, there are some ugly uniforms out there.
Wake Forest has like stayed pretty traditional with like their look too, and it's just like it's not nice. So
they're one I'm like, I actually wouldn't mind you changing that a little bit.
100%, 100%.
You might want to, Georgia Techs are just blah. They're kind of blah. It's too much gold. Like they build around the gold. I like Georgia Tech when they go gold and blue and white. What I don't like is the gold and the gold. There are just some colors that the helmet and the jersey should not be the same color. Sometimes it's okay. More often than not, I don't like the jersey and the helmet being the same color. More often than not. I don't know. It just looks
I'll say this. I dislike USC very much, but I actually kind of like the uniforms. I think they're kind of nice.
I think they're kind of dull.
I
think Iowa State's are better.
Everything.
I like the tradition of it. I'll say this. I like USC's helmets a lot more than I like their uniforms. Is that fair?
Oh, yes. You just said traditional, so that reminded me. I like Iowa too. I don't know if that's weird. Like the black Iowas, yes.
And they haven't messed with it. I mean, they've kept it. They've kept it true. Yeah, they've kept it true. Illinois got some decent uniforms sometimes, and I didn't like their old uniforms, but as they've kind of modernized, they've kept the tradition, but like just a little bit more modern graphics. I think they have some nice uniforms. I'm going to tell Sean Davis that I told him that I said that about their uniforms because then he's going to give me brownie points because that's his alma mater. So yeah, there you go. Always trying to get brownie points.
Well, they have to do something because the on field's not too great right now. So
They were better last year, though. They were competitive
yes.
last year.
Bielema,
They were
I think
what
they'll
you'd
do all right
expect
with
the
Bielema.
Bielema team to be. They were tough.
Yeah.
They were tough.
They had a pretty good run game last year, man. The Chase Brown kid and the McNary freshman kid last
Hey,
year.
look, that was the team that gave Nebraska their most convincing loss last year. I mean, it was
Nebraska
an 8-point game, but
anybody.
it was never competitive in that game. It was never competitive.
And every Nebraska game was competitive.
Exactly. So. I mean, they had the ball in the fourth quarter of every game with a chance to win, including the Ohio State game. That game, they had to come back to make it an 8-point game because Illinois was smacking them.
Yeah.
Sean Kane said, who is the best individual edge rusher that the Notre Dame offensive line will face in the regular season, in your opinion, Ryan?
Miles Murphy from Clemson, I think, just off the top of my head, unless there's somebody that I'm overlooking. But Miles Murphy is a potential top 15, 20 pick. Like, I think he's that type of dude. I mean, he's 6'5", 275, speed, the power converter. He is a monster, man. So that would probably be my guy. I mean, Ohio State, we'll see what develops. I mean, right now they're not even close to that type of conversation. Underrated guy, I like the Tyler Beatty kid from BYU. I think he's a pretty solid little football player, but I think it's pretty convincingly Miles Murphy for me.
Every time somebody talks about him, I always think of I'm like, no, that's the kid from Missouri. You have the wrong name.
It's with a T, not
right.
Beatty. Beatty.
Right. I'm like, no. Oh yeah, that's right. There is a kid at BYU with the same name. That's a good point. Yeah, it's always kind of confuses me. Why are we talking about that kid? They don't play Missouri, and he went pro anyway. Oh wait, right. Different guy. Yeah. Kenny Moore. Yep. Kenny Moore says, has quarterback play prevented Michael Mayer from maxing out his potential production-wise at Notre Dame? I don't think so. I mean, I thought they keyed on him a lot in 2020. I don't think Ian Book ever shied away from him. I mean, his production was tamped down with Ian Book the way anybody's was. I think if anything, I mean, Jack Cohn loved throwing to Michael Mayer last year. The only thing that really kept his production down is when Michael Mayer didn't have enough time. I mean, when Jack Cohn didn't have enough time, but I mean, Jack Cohn loved throwing to Michael Mayer. I mean, there were several throws last year where Jack Cohn would take a hit in order to get the ball out to Michael Mayer. I think was it the Toledo game, the first drive of the game, they ran a wheel route with Michael Mayer, and Jack saw the guy coming, and he's like, I'm about to get hit. But he had to wait for Mayer to get up on the vertical, and as soon as he did, he threw it and got drilled. And then, banged it, and Mayer caught it, and it was a big play. But, I think Jack Cohn loved throwing to Mayer last year, and they used him a lot. I mean, look, he had 71 catches for 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. He set the Notre Dame single-season record with the first 2 numbers and then tied the record with the touchdown number and didn't play against Virginia Tech and was kind of hobbled for half of the Cincinnati game.
Yes.
And he still had those numbers. So I get coming from Kenny. I think that what I would say is maybe the system in 2020 maybe tamped his numbers down a tad, but again, he still caught 42 balls for 450 yards as a freshman. I think the yards maybe could have been better. And one of the things too, Ryan, is we didn't talk about this during the show is when we talk about Michael Mayer improving, and some people had mentioned, I want to see him move, be used vertically. That's the reason I didn't address that is because that's not really a Michael Mayer thing. That's more of they got to throw him the ball vertically. They got to call plays to do that is going to be the big key for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's more of a system thing as well. I think that you could see, I mean, there's a very realistic conversation, Brian, where it's like maybe Michael Mayer has 71 catches again, but maybe it's for 900 yards, because he's used a little bit more as a seam runner. And so he's able to create more explosive plays. But again, that wasn't really Jack Cohn's fault. That's more of like, couldn't protect long enough. You kind of had to do what you had to do to get the ball out quicker. If the offensive line's better, maybe you're able to kind of threaten those seams and create more explosive plays. So I think that, but I think from a target share perspective, Michael Mayer has been very good. I mean, he's gotten a lot of targets. He's done a lot with it, but maybe the targets just look a little different this year is my biggest thing.
Yep. We had some conversation on the helmet talk. John A1 said Illinois has a good uniform, but I like the helmet I didn't like the helmet when the Illinois spelled out on it should be an I. And that's kind of what I was referring to is like they still have the same traditional feel, the blue jerseys, the green pants. But the modernizing that I'm talking about is it's cleaned up the numbers a little bit, but then going to that big block I looks a lot cleaner than when they used to have Illinois. Or it wasn't even Illinois, it was Illini, I thought.
Yes.
It wasn't Illinois. I think it was Illini is what was spelled out, not Illinois. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I thought I remembered. But I definitely, John, agree with you on the block eye. Ed says Colorado's ugly uniforms also. Yes, and they always have. Black and gold, because I don't like Purdue's. I don't like. I just don't like black and gold as a.
You don't like Wake Forest either.
Color. That's a good point. I think I don't like UCF's jerseys a whole lot. I just don't think I like black and gold. I just think it's kind of, just not a big fan.
I don't really mind Colorado's uniforms that much. Like, I wouldn't say they're good, but like they're fine.
Yeah, their helmets aren't bad. Mm-hmm. It's just I don't like their. I don't know. Black and gold is just. You
just don't like the colors.
Yeah. I don't like the color combination. So, Arizona's uniform that at times I like. The change they made recently, they've gone to the white helmet. I actually like that. I like their white helmet with the blue and red A. I like that.
That's another good one is that I do not like Arizona State's uniforms. Never really have. Even like the Rudy Carpenter days, I wasn't a big fan of those.
I mean, going all the way back even before then in my time, I don't know what it is about that version of maroon and yellow. I don't love.
It's like a very cartoon devil on there too.
And I don't like devils. I mean, I'm just my thing. I don't like, I like the Duke has a D, not a devil. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of those mascots, but you're not alone in Arizona State. Robert Bishop doesn't like Arizona State's uniforms either. But I think those are not attractive uniforms.
I used to play with Arizona State sometimes in like NCAA, and I'm just like, I hate these uniforms. Man. I absolutely hate
they're
them.
Pretty bad. Why did you play with Arizona State? Who was their quarterback that you liked?
I just randomized it. I think it was Rudy Carpenter.
Okay.
I think, or maybe that was actually after Rudy Carpenter. I can't remember, but whatever.
It's all good.
Rudy Carpenter was a good player, though, man. I liked him. I liked him.
Here's one. Jeremy Bonk says, I've seen arguments online that if we lose to Ohio State, Notre Dame won't make the playoff. I think that is insane. We still end up 11-1 with wins over Clemson, BYU, and USC. What do you guys think? Look, Jeremy, this has been true since the playoff started. There's been this mantra driven mainly by ESPN, and a lot of Notre Dame fans have bought into this, that they have to go undefeated to make the playoff. And I mean, that's just, in my opinion, it's not accurate. And they've made the playoff with a loss. And then the response is, well, they were in a conference that year. Okay, whatever. In 2015, they rose up to number 4 with a loss. They lost to Clemson. And it wasn't until they started playing bad in November that they fell out of the top 4. And in 2017, Ryan, they got all the way up to number 3 with a loss to Georgia. And they had, in their final 3 games, they had a top 10 Miami team on the road, a top 25 Stanford team on the road. You're telling me Notre Dame would have fallen out of the top 3 at 11-1 with wins over, because they would have had a win over ranked USC, ranked Michigan State, ranked NC State, ranked Miami, and ranked Stanford because of why? It's an ESPN driven fact, thing that's turned into a fact with some people. Notre Dame did not make the playoff last year 11-1 because they didn't deserve to make the playoff last year 11-1 because they had 0 wins over ranked opponents. 2017, 11-1, they're in and they're a 1 or 2 or a 3 seed. This year, if they go 11-1, assuming it's not a blowout, then I think the same thing is true, that they're in the playoff because you're going to have Clemson, BYU, North Carolina, BC, USC, all those type of wins on your schedule. That barring it being a year where there's like 4 undefeated conference champions, you're in. I mean, that's how I think it'll go. So and they would have made it last year if Georgia would have beat Alabama in the SEC title game.
Yes,
and that's with no wins over top 25 teams.
They would have made it last year if Auburn would have beaten Alabama, Auburn was beating Alabama. It was crazy. 59
flipping minutes.
Oh,
thank you very much, Tank Bigsby.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just something people say. Look, there's a lot of opinions out there, Jeremy, that are just uninformed, and in some instances, and other instances, they're just saying things to fire people up. But there's a lot of wrong things that are said that are easily disprovable, and this is one of the easiest just because of where Notre Dame is ranked. The reality is the committee has always loved on Notre Dame. I would argue that if you look at just resumes, you could argue that maybe Notre Dame shouldn't have been number 5 going into the playoff, into the conference championship weekend because they hadn't beaten anybody, right? I mean, I think that's a case you could have made, but the committee still loved them.
I think there's any indicator, Jeremy, that you're correct, though. It's last year, and people would say, like, what do you mean? They didn't make it. They had a soft schedule in which they went 11-1, and the eye test told you that was not a great Notre Dame team. And yet, they were down to the wire to potentially making the playoffs.
They were fifth. Because they were 6th. Excuse me. Oklahoma State lost to Baylor.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first thing that needed to happen. And then they needed Alabama to lose. So they were 6th. And then they climbed up to 5th after Oklahoma State lost to Baylor.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, Ryan, eye test, resume, all of it just wasn't.
Didn't deserve it. But yet they were still in the conversation. So.
Right. Here's an interesting question from Irish Mojo 25. Would a Kyle Rudolph type NFL career for Michael Mayer be considered a success?
I'd say no. I mean, personally, Kyle Rudolph has been a good NFL player, but Michael Mayer, I think, is just a different level of a prospect. So that's going to set some standards. It's going to set some expectations. Like Kyle Rudolph was a good player. The projection is that Michael Mayer is going to be a great player at the next level. And if he ends up just being a good player, can you call him a bust? No, but I also wouldn't call it a success because I think he has more upside than that.
I have a hard time saying that a guy that's going to play 12 years in the National Football League and has over 400 catches and 4,000 yards and 49 touchdowns is not successful. Is it Hall of Fame worthy? Clearly not. Is it living up to his full potential? Definitely not. But I just would have a hard time saying it's not at least a success. I think there's varying levels of success, right? And I think you would agree with this. Would you say, let's say he's drafted like 12th overall. Would you say he lived up to that draft slot? No. Would you say he reached his full potential? No. But if you play 12, 13 years in the National Football League, you've had a successful career.
That's fair.
That's where I come from.
If he wants to trade places with me, I would take it.
Right.
Just from the expectations of what the draft slot is and what the talent level is, it's just that.
I think you could use the word didn't live up to expectations, but that's different than saying did he have a successful career? Considered a success. Again, there's a lot of guys that were drafted 12th that never made it past 3 or 4 years or never did anything. Kyle Rudolph has had a good career. His draft slot was lower. So, to your point, he's had a good career for where he was drafted. Would Michael Mayer's career be perceived the same way? No. But anytime, like I said, anytime you play, he's going into his 12th year in the National Football League. And he's played a lot of games and caught a lot of balls and all that kind of stuff. That's a success. It's not like, okay, let's have a Hall of Fame conversation of success, but it's a success. Even if you do view it as an underachievement, which I would understand.
Well, people have Hall of Fame conversations about everyone nowadays. So,
I know,
why not? Let's Kyle Rudolph for Hall of Fame. Right? Let's start the campaign.
We don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And then there's guys that should be in the Hall of Fame that aren't.
They're still waiting. Yeah.
That's the weird thing. It's like, why are we advocating for this guy when this guy should have been in before him? It's odd.
Yes.
Very, very odd.
Very political, the Hall of Fame.
Yes, voting. It is. Yes, it is. Okay, let's get to some more questions. We have one from Kevin Carter, 2-parter. I know Brian talked about Quentin Nelson hitting people so hard they wanted to give up. Has Notre Dame ever had a team that was so physically abusive on both sides of the ball the other team wanted to quit? Is it possible we could see both lines developed enough in the future to see it again? So let me just speak to that. Yes, I think they've had lines like that. I was watching the 92 and 93 games recently, and I think both of those lines had those moments. Now, are they doing that to everybody? Are you going to go play Alabama in the playoff or Georgia in the playoff and they want to quit? No. But, it's other teams and individual players. Yeah, you want no part of that. And then that's what Notre Dame was, is like, when you're truly a great program, you win a lot of games before they even start. USC was this way in the Pac-12. Teams would just, the first time something bad happened, Ryan, they're like, uh-oh, here we go. And it would just snowball. And it's been this way with Alabama. It's just like teams played defeated. Notre Dame did that in the Cotton Bowl 2 years ago. They just played, let's not get blown out. They had beat themselves before the game even started. And that's when you're great. And that was how it was with Notre Dame at times from like 88 to 93, is there were just teams that were just, not all of them. Like, Stanford had that team that beat them in 92. They weren't afraid of them. But there was a lot of teams that they played and they're like, that team was beat before they started. Like I was watching the 92 BC game last night. And BC was like, I think top 10 coming into that game. They were really good. It was the team that would go on to beat them the next year. And Notre Dame punched them in the mouth a couple times. And BC just won. It was like, you could just tell BC knew that day they were going to get rolled. Like they were beat before the game even started. And as soon as Notre Dame hit them in the mouth a little bit, it's like, okay, yeah, they wanted no part of that. And, mentally they knew they were going to get beat that day. And this is how it is sometimes. And it's because it was such a physical football team. 93, BC had a different mentality, and they beat Notre Dame. So yeah, that's happened in the past. Could it happen in the future? Not in 2022. I don't think the Notre Dame defensive line is going to be so physical that teams just don't want any part of it. I think it's more about like, I don't want to chase this guy around all day. It's just a different type of group. But as I look at the future and I see, the Tyson Ford and Gobira and Josh Burnham, last year's class, like monsters like Boubacar and Brendan Vernon and Devin Houston, and then Brendan Davis Swain and some other guys down there, Owen Wayful. I mean, they're bringing in some guys that are blue collar, talented, long, big, physical guys. And so, yeah, I think there's a chance you can get back to that in the future. And of course, the offensive line has got coming to you. And thoughts on that, Ryan? You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can have half the equation this year because I think the offensive line could get to that level, but even they are a question mark at this point. But right. I mean, to your point, Brian,
to that level, right?
Yes, to that level. But as long as you have the proper coaching and you have the physical tools that some of these Notre Dame players have, it's very possible. But it's not something that I think is going to be directly, to your point, 2022 version. And I mean, we've talked a lot about the interior defensive line for Notre Dame, right? Like those are not the guys that you're going to physically dominate dudes. Like they're one gap in, you're going to use your quickness to win type of players, right? So it could happen. I mean, if they start loading up with more guys that look like Gabriel Rubio and that type of physical profile, then it's possible, but it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress over the next couple of years.
Got more uniform questions, Ryan. Here's one from John A1. Unpopular opinion, I like Auburn's uniforms better than LSU's. I don't think that's unpopular for me. Not for me. What are your thoughts on LSU's uniforms?
I'm not a big yellow guy. I don't know. It's fine. Like the whites are fine. I actually don't mind the purple.
I like their purple uniforms more.
Yeah, they're okay.
I do.
They're okay.
I'll say this. LSU has one of the sweetest midfield logos, though. That Eye of the Tiger thing they have in the midfield is pretty sweet. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty sweet.
I need to Google that. I don't
know
exactly what it looks like.
They got that Eye of the Tiger thing on midfield.
I think Auburn's is kind of classic looking.
Yeah,
like, I can dig Auburn. They're fine.
The only time I didn't like Auburn's uniforms was that period, and I think it was the 80s when they had the orange face mask. That was hideous.
They had an orange face
mask?
I don't remember that. Wow.
Yeah. I think it was a little before your time. If I remember correctly, it was back in the 1980s. I'm actually going to try to look that up.
So that's like the Bo Jackson era of Auburn?
Yes.
I'm going to look it up too.
Yes. Yeah. So let me just, because I actually think I remember it on Bo Jackson.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. It's pretty hideous. Yeah.
Wow. I don't remember that at all. Yeah. You need the
in your defense, you weren't born yet.
Yeah.
So, sure. I mean, but no, I like Auburn's uniforms. I do. I think they're classically sharp. Somebody else said Nebraska's are awful. That's one that I think is kind of boring, but I think for me, it was more of the combination of their uniforms being that way, and they played a really dull style of football for a long time.
I like Wisconsin's, though.
Yeah.
I like Wisconsin's.
Yeah, I do. Well, and I'm kind of biased because when I coached at Wittenberg, our uniforms are basically patterned after Wisconsin's, and I really like that. Their W was different than ours, but it was sharp. I like Wisconsin's. I do. You got to be careful with red because you can really jack red up in a uniform. But I think Wisconsin does it. You can overdo it.
Yeah, I like kind of the simplicity of Nebraska though. They just have like the N on the helmet. Like I think it kind of look nice. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it's just it's too blocky. I think because like where Wisconsin has a little bit of curves, and I don't know. And then Wisconsin usually has more stripes down the middle too. So I think that adds a little bit more to it as well. So
gotcha. Yeah,
but Nebraska's kind of dull. But it's not as bad as Penn State because again, the red is going to pop more than just a navy blue and a white. I think, and that's why Alabama's uniforms don't bother me. Like, I mean, they're not sharp, but they're good. They're all right. But because at least there's some color in your helmet. They're one of the few teams that I actually like this helmet and the jersey being the same color.
I like the number on the helmet too. I think that's kind of cool. It's different. It's very different,
and it's traditional, and at least gives something on there. So that's obviously an important thing. All right, let's get to some more questions here from everybody. We've got a question here from John H. This is for you, Ryan. If NCAA rules allowed players to leave for NFL after sophomore year, do you think Michael Mayer would have been a first-round pick in 2022 NFL draft?
I actually do. I do because for a couple reasons. One, I think Michael Mayer is really talented, right? Like I think that he's a first-round caliber football player, and he's a player that's been physically advanced. I mean, like I've talked about, like, I think you could have dropped him in as a freshman and he would not have looked out of place on an NFL roster. So I think he physically could handle right now playing on the NFL level. And the other fact was the top of the tight end class last year had some decent depth to it, but it didn't really have a guy up top. I mean, the first tight end off the board was Trey McBride, who I liked, but like second round pick type of player, right? So Michael Mayer, I think, is stylistically similar to Trey McBride, but just better at basically everything across the board. So I do think he would have been a first round pick because of the talent he has and the quality of the class last year at the top.
I have a question for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
This is something that I found interesting because 2 of the last 3 years we have seen in the last 3 years, we've only seen one tight end picked in the first round. He went really high as Kyle Pitts.
Yes.
Now, again, this is an outsider looking in. I don't watch NFL a lot, but I see a lot of tight ends in the NFL making a lot of plays and a lot of production. Yet you're seeing tight end being a position that you're just not getting drafted as high. Now, I know there's exceptions. You had the year where you had TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant both drafted in the first round, Kyle Pitts, but he was a little bit more of an anomaly. But it just seems like the last 3 or 4 years, and is it because they kind of like – I guess my question is it because like maybe years when you had like O.J. Howard and Evan Ingram and David Njoku, and they haven't really necessarily panned out like a first-round pick? Is it the tight ends haven't been as good coming out? I mean, is tight end turning into running back? I'm just trying to understand, like, do you think it's just the players aren't good enough, or is it something going on in the NFL?
I think it's a string of the classes, to be honest. I don't think it's a team. I don't think a team's going to hesitate to take a game changer at tight end, which is why you're still seeing guys go first round that are
Falcons
extremely talented.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing, Brian, for me is that I think a lot of colleges underutilize tight ends.
That's
if
true.
I'm being honest, like there's a lot of productive tight ends. I mean, I think of like George Kittle. What did George Kittle's best year at Iowa? He caught like 30 something passes. Like he wasn't overly utilized on the college level. So I think the guys that you see that are utilized, like the Kyle Pitts, are like, oh, okay, that guy's a dude. I think Michael Mayer is going to be looked at the same way. It's like, oh, he's already a dude. While some guys have projection to them. Like not every college tight end is used like Mark Andrews was at Oklahoma. Like you just don't see that. I think that there's a lot of good tight ends in the NFL right now that I would be like, that guy just wasn't used enough on the college level for whatever reason. Like I think of Dalton Schultz just caught like 80 passes for the Dallas Cowboys. Was he ever a dude at Stanford? Like I feel like he was a solid player, but like not a dude, like production wise, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was part of a time where it's kind of interesting. Stanford has been a little bit funky with their tight ends. Like last year, their tight end was their leading receiver last year. The year before that, I mean, I know they only played 6 games, but their tight ends only caught 13 passes.
Yeah,
it's just kind of weird. Like the year before that, Colby Parkinson caught a lot. But then, Caden Smith caught a lot, but then it just, I don't know. It's like there's years where it seems like they don't. Dalton Schultz's last year was their leading tight end. He caught 23 passes for 222 yards, and Greg Tabata caught 5 passes. So it's been kind of weird. It's just been kind of weird. So, yeah. Yep. So we'll see how that goes. Rob Thidoff says, Brian and Ryan, what is the offensive lineman that must show the most improvement from last year in order to have a dominant O-line for 2022? Ryan, I think we answered this during the show. It's Zeke Correll.
Yeah.
I mean, he has to play a lot better than he did last year. We think he will, but if he's anywhere close to what he was last year, that's a problem.
Right, because, I mean, for the other players in the offensive line, you feel like the baseline is at least good, right? Like, how good will they be is a question mark. But Zeke Correll was bad last year, right? Like you can't have a bad member of an offensive line and have a good offensive line. Like that's a little bit of a difference. So I agree with you. I think it's Zeke Correll pretty easily for me.
Will Claw says, will Joe Alt take the next step and be an elite offensive lineman? Let's answer this twofold, Ryan, and it may not even be twofold, but I'll ask the first part one way and then the second part, if applicable. Will Joe Alt take the next step and be an elite offensive lineman in 2022?
It's very possible.
Okay.
I mean,
what's your
every
prediction?
Chance is there.
What's your prediction?
Elite, but not quite elite. I think Blake Fisher's more likely the person that hits the elite level. And I think that I mean, expecting 2 different offensive tackles in the same year to hit an elite level, I think is a little unrealistic. So I would say Joe Alt is very good in 2022, but bordering on elite, but not quite there yet would be my guess.
Okay. Milton Fan 15 says, Brian, can you do a show of top 10 things you disagreed with Brian Kelly about? I don't know if that would be a real fun show, to be honest with you. Like, it'd be all completely negative. Milton, I think a show that might be good, or a format that might be good on, would be on the message board honestly. Like,
You
I just
should
feel
do
like
that, please.
because here's the reason why. If I did a show on it, I would have my disposition would be super negative and cringy. Like I just, it would just be constant negativity. And I don't know if I would even enjoy doing that show. Like Milton, where I might have been more prone to answer this was like right after he left. If you'd have asked me a question like, back in December, hey, what are the 10 things you disagree with, Brian? I probably wouldn't have been able to stop at 10. I probably would have done like a 4-hour-long marathon show of all the things I disliked about Brian Kelly and the things I disagreed with. But I mean, the biggest things for me, I mean, if you just look at play calling, I think there were just a couple things that stand out. I mean, I've talked about, I thought he should have started Malik Zaire in 2016. That was a mistake. I think he should have put Phil Dracovic in either for the Virginia Tech game or definitely after the Virginia Tech game, as how bad Ian Book was for those two, Ryan. Should have definitely kicked the extra point against Northwestern in the fourth quarter. That was one of the dumbest in-game coaching calls I've ever seen. Going 12-13, there's just no difference right there at that point in time. So going for 2 made no sense. In that same game, they had another stupid play call, Ryan. They ran a jet sweep inside the 5-yard line to Chris Brown, who had never carried a jet sweep in his career. Like Ian Book Tommy Reese is a freshman against Tulsa, steps in for Dane Christ, leads the team down on a drive that wins the game. And you decide to have your freshman quarterback, who didn't even have a strong arm as a senior, do a rollout, go route into the end zone to Michael Floyd, and you're shocked that it didn't quite get as far as it needed to get to and got picked off. Like, that's on you. That's not on Tommy Reese. So, yeah, that would be another one. Those are just some of the ones that kind of pop off the top of my head, Ryan. But that's about as far as I want to go with that one.
It would be a fantastic article if you wrote, it'd be the most clickbaity thing ever. Top 10 Brian Kelly decisions I hated the most.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make me want to have to work for a different website that I have no interest in working for.
You
can
make an honorable mention section that'll have like 20 other things.
Yeah. I mean, they're like coaching hires and fires. Brian Van Gorder not being fired after 2014, Jeff Quinn, Della. I mean, there'd be a lot. I'd have a hard time narrowing it down. But that'd be a good message board question, because then there'd be a lot of people that would remember things that I wouldn't remember. But I wouldn't want to do a whole show on that. But I also didn't want to dismiss your question and not give you anything. So I gave you some, because it's a fair question. I don't think he was asking me to be mean or rude or disrespectful. Just, disagreed with. Okay, that's fair. There's going to be things I'm going to disagree with Marcus Freeman about. It's
Milton,
just part of my job.
If you're going to be at any of the games this year, if there's an Irish breakdown tailgate happening, that's the perfect question to ask when you're there at the tailgate.
Yep. There's no doubt.
Ask Brian about the Bible.
Oh my God, that was beautiful. I mean, that's just absurd. That's just so absurd. Oh my gosh. What are your thoughts on Tennessee's uniforms, Ryan?
I like them.
I like them.
I kind of like that burnt orange type of thing going on. Yeah, I respect those. I like it.
I do too.
Mm-hmm. The T on the helmet's pretty sharp too.
I like them. Yeah. I do. Mm-hmm. And I love the checkerboard end zone. I think that's really cool. Nobody else really does it. I just think it's really cool. Yeah, I think it's really cool. Their fans are pretty terrible, but I think their uniforms are pretty sweet. And I even like the first time when I heard they were going to go orange and orange with the white, I thought, I'm going to hate that. It's too much orange. But I actually liked it. Like, it wasn't as like, okay, it's too fluorescent for me. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was actually, I kind of liked it. I still like the white, orange, white, but I actually liked it.
I usually hate those like gray uniforms, but their grays are actually kind of nice. I kind of like them a little bit. Yeah. So
they're not bad. They're not bad. Yeah. They're not bad. I like Tennessee's uniforms. There's no doubt. Alan Watson with a super chat. Thank you, Alan. I remember Brian Kelly's first class, and I thought those were men compared to previous years. Now, with the past 2 years, these aren't men but monsters. I am wrong. Or am I wrong? I am wrong. I'm not sure how Alan wanted to go that one. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because, Brian Kelly recruited better early in his tenure than he did later in his tenure when it came to just getting top players. I mean, signed 3 5-star defensive ends in one class, signed a borderline 5-star corner a year later. 2013, he signed several 5-stars, several top 10 players, but then it kind of, I don't know what changed, but they definitely weren't where they needed to be from a recruiting standpoint. There's no doubt about that. Here we go, Ryan. So Blaine Tiller says, B Ryan, who are your try-hard guys at each position group this year? maybe not the most talented, but hardest workers from what you have heard?
It's an interesting question. Try hard, but not the most talented. Do you have
It's a
something that
good one.
popped to your head? I mean, like I
Yeah.
was thinking offensive line wise, maybe Zeke Correll fits into
Well,
that as far as like in the top
my
group.
first thought with the defensive side was Justin Adamiola, but then I don't want to say he's not talented.
Right.
You know, like that. I think he's talented. I just think he's a little undersized, but he's a try hard guy who maybe doesn't have
Howard Cross. Maybe
Yeah, it's a good one.
another one.
That's a good one. The reason I kind of lean towards Adamiola is because if you're going to compare his talent to that of like Isaiah Foskey, it's not there. But let's just say next year Justin Adamiola decides to come back for a 6th year, and Isaiah Foskey's a first-round pick. Would you be shocked if Justin Adamiola had 10 sacks?
No, I wouldn't.
Right? I mean, but that's also partly why I don't want to put him in there because I think he's actually talented. I just think he's undersized. Right. I think Howard Cross is similar. I think Howard Cross is pretty talented. He's just small.
Yeah.
I mean, for him to be as productive as he is at that size, he's got to be pretty talented. You know, so that the try hard. DJ Brown. I don't think DJ Brown's super talented, but he tries hard. And when he's made mistakes, like the missed tackles he had, it was never because he didn't try hard. You know, he works hard, he's got a great attitude, does everything you need him to do. He's just not super talented. That would be one that would, you know, what's funny is I can't think of a lot of guys like that. There in the past years, that was easy to do. You know, Trevor Ruland,
Joe Schmidt.
Daniel Smith, Joe Schmidt, guys who just weren't, you know, there aren't a lot of guys that I'm like, oh, that guy. No, but he's not untalented. Like one of my thoughts was Bo Bauer. I was like, but he's not untalented.
He's 6'3" like, with pretty good speed.
Yeah, like if you'd have left the talented part out, like I'm not talented, I probably would have a lot more answers for you, but
Bo Bauer would have been the first one. If
Clarence Lewis is one that kind of pops in my head. I plays really hard. I don't know if he's super talented, at least not yet, but plays hard. Offensively is where I have a little bit more of a hard time, which is a lot of the reasons Notre Dame's not been that good on offense in recent years. Because I don't think they have a lot of tough guys. To be honest
I think we should just strike the not talented part because I want to mention even like Jason Adamalola, like that guy plays hard, man.
Yeah.
Like he plays
sometimes
hard,
a little too hard.
Yeah, for sure. Though.
Yeah.
I mean, like you're not wrong. Yeah, I mean, but you need to play it. Again, he's another guy that's not as undersized as Howard Cross, but like he's still undersized, right? So like he has to play that type of brand of football. So yeah.
Yep. I got a super chat down here from Michael Rudiger. Michael, I am not going to bring your super chat up. It's no disrespect for you, but there's a lot of areas where it could potentially get problematic for us if we speak about injuries publicly. With Notre Dame, with legal things, with there's just a lot that so we don't like to do that. And again, I've heard all the stuff you've heard. I've talked to some different people, and that's all I'm going to say. So until Notre Dame speaks on it, I believe Marcus Freeman is going to have a press conference tomorrow. I'm just not going to comment on it. I don't want to draw it up because I don't want to add fuel to that. It potentially expose us to some issues that I just would rather not expose us to. So that's the reason we're avoiding that conversation in this format. So, I may have something on the message board later, but probably not. I just, again, when it comes to potential injuries, and it's not your bad, Michael. You don't know that. You're not. How could you know that? You're all good, buddy. I don't want you to think that I'm ignoring your comment or it just, when it comes to things like injuries that aren't public knowledge, so I have broken stories about injuries in the past. That was always done with Notre Dame knowing what I know, them saying, hey, could you hold off a week? Because if you ever notice when I've broken those injury stories, it's always like 30 minutes before Notre Dame releases it because that was the arrangement. I'm like, hey, look, we know, but there's legality stuff involved and potential opening yourself up to certain things if you start reporting on something that the school hasn't gone through the proper channels to make known, if there is something at all. Right. So that's why I haven't commented on it. So I don't want you to think I don't want it to seem like I'm disrespecting you or not putting your chat in there. There's a reason why I'm not bringing your chat up, and I hope people will understand why that is. So another question here. Ryan is Archer 452. Speaking of the O-line, how many teams do they face that could realistically give them a challenge this year? 2 is this question. They should dominate the vast majority of the teams on their schedule. So if you're going to say, who do you think are the 3 or 4 toughest matchups for Notre Dame?
I'm thinking of so I'm talking about Notre Dame's offensive line against the defensive line, or vice
versa?
Who
would be the matchups for that could be problems for the Notre Dame offensive line? If I said that incorrectly, it's my bad.
Easy one. No. I think I just read it wrong. So Clemson's the easy one, right? I mean, if they're healthy, they have Miles Murphy, Brian Bresee, Tyler Davis, Xavier Thomas. Hopefully, if he's coming back from injury, like it's a talented unit, man. Like they're third and fourth, all defensive ends or guys like KJ Henry, who's a pretty decent football player, right? So like Clemson's the easy one. Ohio State, if they play to their peak, I guess, if like they take a step forward, but I'm not certain about that one. So I'll say Clemson's the only one, in my opinion, that for sure can give Notre Dame problems right now. And then after that, Archer, in my opinion, it's just like individual players. Like I think Tyleik Williams will have a couple plays that he probably has a nice little impact against Ohio State. I mentioned Tyler Beatty before from BYU as a guy that I think could have a couple nice plays. But as a whole unit, Clemson's the only one that I for sure think can give Notre Dame some problems.
Yeah. We got a question here from Meyer03. Can you go over the second string? He asked 2 questions, so he asked it 2 ways. Who are the first guys off the bench at left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle? And then his super chat was, can you go over the second string, left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle? So, Ryan, the first thing is that's not always how it works. It's not always how the left tackle goes down, the number 2 left tackle goes in the game. Right tackle goes down, the number 2 right tackle goes in the game. Sometimes it could be like, here's the first guy off the bench. But I'm going to stay true to your question, Ryan. So we'll go over the second string as opposed to that's why he asked it twice in 2 different ways. And I think the super chat version makes it a little bit easier to answer where it doesn't, where we can be more true, because it is just like second string. So let's go about that. So right now, left to right, Ryan, you tell me if you necessarily disagree with this. I'd go left to right, left tackle. I'd go Tosh Baker.
Yes.
Left guard, I would go Andrew Kristofic.
Yes.
Center, I would go right now. It's Pat Coogan. Although I would imagine, they may move someone there, but Pat Coogan is the second string center as of right now, from what I'm told. Okay. Right guard is a little bit unknown because I've seen Rocco Spindler playing left and right guard, but the most recent I saw him was right guard. So I would imagine he's in that conversation, and he would probably be who I would project to be the next right guard. Okay. And then at right tackle, a guy I've heard from a couple different people that's had a really good fall camp is Caleb Johnson as the number 2 right tackle would be in there. And then, of course, the freshmen are all going to be battling for those spots, but that's where I would project the 2 deep as of right now.
Seems fair.
And thank you for super chat too, by the way. So we had it on our docket. We had it queued. We just needed to get to it. And it's a good question. It's a good question.
It was a good way to start that one out though, Brian, because it's, I mean, if an injury happens to either left tackle or right tackle, it may the answer might be Tosh Baker to both spots. Right?
Might be might be right, or it could be Andrew Kristofic is going to be the next interior guy, center or both guards
or center. Yeah, good point.
It could be. And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying it could be. Yeah, and so that's Michael Carmody's also battling it at inside and outside, but he's been out a little bit. He hasn't practiced much this fall camp, so
to your point, it's also like, if something happens to Blake Fisher, for instance, God forbid, maybe Josh Law gets kicked out the right tackle and they bring another guard in, like
Kristofic. Kind of maybe they say, look, Kristofic is clearly our best next lineman, so we'll bump Josh out to tackle, and it could be that too. I think it just depends on the confidence level that they would have in the next tackle. So, but as far as pure second string, Meyer, I think that's a better way of phrasing it. I think it makes it easier to answer it that way.
Sure.
And then last one, or I think we might have last one here, but this is one that I completely forgot about. These are uniforms that I really like. Chuck Melcher says Florida has nice uniforms. I like Florida's uniforms, even their blue on blue. And again, I don't normally like pants and jerseys being the same color, but Florida's are sharp. I like it. And I prefer the orange, blue, white. It's my preference. But even when they go all blue, I like them. But I like Florida's uniforms. I don't like the white Florida helmets, but when they're orange and it says Gators, I like those. I
think they use white nice in the jersey to make things pop out, which I really like. So I like the orange, blue as well.
Yep. And really when they go white, they have the nice the orange and blue stripes and white stripes down the middle, on the side. I do not like it when they go to the F on the helmet, and it's usually on the white. I don't know if I've ever seen it on the green helmet. I've only seen it on the white helmet. So when they use the alternate white helmet, it's just an F. It's the old F. I don't like that. I like I like the Gators. I think that's really sharp. The orange Gators.
And like the cursive looking thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's got an old school feel to it, but it's still sharp. And like you said, I think, Ryan, you pointed out really well. They use the white really well to make
Makes everything pop.
Yeah. And then they don't put too much orange on it. The orange is up here, on the sleeves. I think that's a good observation. I really like those uniforms. I don't love Clemson's, but I'll tell you this. When I like Clemson's uniforms is when they go with some more purple. I don't know what it is. Like, they're not that much different than Tennessee, like the color, but it's not quite as bright. The orange isn't quite as bright. But I really like when I don't know why, but when they've gone to the orange helmet. Now, I do like Clemson's helmets. I don't know. It's just, it's traditional, just having that paw print. It's just traditional to me. But when they go with the purple jerseys, I don't know what it is, but I really like those. And I'm not a purple guy. I'm like you. I'm a Celtics fan. So how could I possibly like purple? But I don't know what it is, but I like that. Now, I don't like it when they have the orange pants and the purple, or the orange jerseys and the purple pants. But when they go orange, purple, white, that's probably my favorite color combination for Clemson. I think that's really sharp.
Dig it.
I like their road uniforms better than their home uniforms. Orange, white, orange. I actually like those more than their home uniforms, to be completely honest. And I don't know why, because I like Tennessee's. I like orange. I'm a Broncos fan. I like orange jerseys, but there's something about Clemson. I don't know. Maybe the purple, when it's just a little bit, just kind of makes it just not look as good. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. But I do like Florida's uniforms. Those are really good ones. And, of course, now for like the next half hour, when I'm off the show, I'm going to be up there going to make some lunch for Ange and I, and I'm going to be thinking about what uniforms I like and don't like. So thanks a lot, guys. So that's it. So that's going to be it for today's show, everybody. We had some fun today in the mailbag, talking about uniforms and things along those lines. Mississippi State has really ugly uniforms. I don't mind the orange. I hate the way that they use they spell out like Mississippi State, like I don't mind their helmets, but the big block M and it's just really hideous.
Yes,
really
it's always been hideous. I mean, even when it was like a little more like KJ Wright era of Mississippi State, it's always ugly.
Yeah, do not like their uniforms.
Yeah.
One of the few SEC teams who I just dislike. I don't dislike any. I like Kentucky's the things they've been doing lately with like using the silver helmets. They've done some nice things with their uniforms. I don't like Missouri's either. That's the other one I don't like.
In Indiana, I'm not a big fan of either. Indiana's, but
but again, Missouri, yellow and black. I don't know what it is. I just don't like those combinations.
I like it a little better when like Jeremy Macklin was there and stuff. They were a little better, but I agree.
It's funny though,
anymore.
But I like Iowa's. To your point earlier,
Iowa's like sharp, man. I think it's the Hawkeye on the helmet. Like, it's nice. I like it.
It could be it. Yeah. It could be. And it's yellow, not necessarily gold. But Missouri's got yellow too. I don't know what it is.
I think it's also that the style fits to how it's presented.
That's true.
Like Iowa's a lunch pail type of team or whatever, and it just has like a lunch pail look to it. Like just a bunch of tough guys are gonna wear it.
Point. It's a good point. Don't like BC's uniforms either. Those are another one I don't like. I'm not a big fan of BC's uniforms. I like BC's road uniforms better than their home uniforms.
I don't like them at all. I don't like any of them.
It's just because there's not as much of those ugly colors on it. Ugly color combination on it. So
I just don't know why a team that's named the Eagles is red and yellow or red and gold, and it's just ugly.
I get you. Here's the last one, Miami. What are your thoughts on Miami?
I like Miami, especially like the throwback, like when the U was the U, like the Ed Reed's uniforms, like the orange. I had some mixed feelings about the orange jerseys, but like the green jerseys with the orange and the U, and
that's why you brought up the Ed Reed, because they wore those a lot more. I don't like Miami's. I don't like their helmet. I don't think the U is nearly as cool looking as people make it out to be because it's small. It's kind of weird. Like it's not real big. It doesn't pop. Like I think they should make it bigger. It's just kind of, it's skinny. It just, whatever. I don't like it. And I don't like their orange uniforms. But yes, during that era when they would go with the green jerseys, I liked those. I didn't love them, but I liked them.
Yeah.
So Kansas at times has, I'm a red, white, and blue guy. Like I just like
Mhm.
uniforms that are red, white, and blue, especially when blue is the primary color. And I
Yeah.
like Baylor's when Baylor goes with because they got rid of the gold and went back
Mhm.
to yellow. When they
Mhm.
go green, and their yellow helmets, I actually like those. I do.
I like Kansas State. The purple
Yeah,
jerseys,
that's a
I think
and
they're
the silver.
sharp. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they're
purple and the
sharp.
silver. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when they go. It's funny. I actually like. There's always exceptions to rules, right? But I like the silver, purple, and silver. Like
Yes.
I like the white also, but I really like the silver, purple because I said earlier I like it when I like white pants and a different color jersey and different color helmet. I like it when it's three different things, whether it's white jersey and colored pants. Kansas State is one of those ones that I actually like when it's the same color because maybe it's because silver is a little easier color, or gray is a little easier color to match a pant with. I
Mhm.
think that's it. But like that's kind of one of the reasons I don't love Alabama's because their jerseys don't actually match their helmets. That's what I
Sure.
hated about the Giants helmets back in the 80s. Their helmets were always like dark. Were they darker? I think they're darker than their jerseys or vice versa. So Arkansas is one somebody brought up. I mean, Arkansas just feels like they're kind of just like everybody else in that region. Like there's all these teams that kind of look the same. Arkansas, Oklahoma, they just all kind of have a very kind of
Yeah.
boring.
Mm.
Like Oklahoma's uniforms are just kind of whatever.
They're fine.
Yeah,
They're traditionalists, so like
yeah,
cool, I guess. But
yeah,
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, they are what they are. Yeah, somebody said Tulane. We talked about them early. Those are hideous.
Tulane's
Yeah,
ugly. Yep. The green
yeah.
wave is not great. It's not great.
Hawaii has been unable to get cool uniforms that fit being in Hawaii. Like
Oh, but I love the
yeah,
all blacks when Cole
yeah,
Brennan was there though. They
yeah,
were nice, man. With the visor and yeah.
yep,
Yep.
yep. Not a big fan. Not a big fan. Somebody said Stanford's unis are boring as heck too, and that's very true. Stanford
Yeah.
has very boring uniforms. There's no doubt about that.
They also
All right,
haven't tried to upgrade it at all.
not
It's
even
still
kind
not.
of. I mean, Stanford, they
Yeah.
don't care. It's like, wait a minute. We have football uniforms. People are changing their football uniforms. What is this nonsense? So yeah, not a big fan. Not a big fan. So that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be some fun. We're going to talk about the all opponent team. We're going to look at the
Mhm.
opposing offenses, kind of talk about the all opponent team, who are the kind of the strongest units at each position, and then we'll fit in Notre Dame's players in there too. Where would Notre Dame's players fit if we were doing an all opponent team that included Notre Dame? So that's going to be a lot of fun. So you're going to make sure you join us tomorrow. Tonight, Sean and Vince are going live at 6 p.m. They're going to talk. Let's see if Sean has texted me what today's topic is going to be. He said they're going to predict how many receptions each player will have this year. So you're going to want to tune in tonight at 6 o'clock. And the reality is, Ryan, is the reason you need to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell. So when we do go live, like we will tonight at 6 o'clock for IB Nation Sports Talk, you will get that notification and you'll know that it is time to go. It is time to rock and roll. Hurry up, wolf that dinner down and get to wherever you watch our shows because it is time to talk some Notre Dame football. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. We'll see all of you on the boards here real soon. See you tonight at 6 o'clock. And of course, Ryan and I will see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern for another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast.